created strong relationships with the UK, and that led to the UK fighting here along us for the two world wars. And of course, we know that from here, there's the biggest Commonwealth cemetery in Europe. So here in the Touquet-Paris-Plage and the Hauts-de-France region, we want to strengthen the relationships with our friends and neighbors. That's also why we were very saddened by the Brexit announcement. But we can always think that Britain had one foot inside and one foot outside from the start. And Churchill said that every time Britain would have to choose between the EU or between Europe or the entire, and would always choose the entire world. Today we are going to talk about, of course, our fishermen of Étaples and Boulogne-sur-Mer. 60 to 70% of their fishing zones are in British waters. Based on the agreements, they still have access to these waters, but they don't always get the needed authorizations. Today, only 23 out of the 108 needed licenses were issued by the British authorities, which threatens the activity of the Hauts-de-France fishermen. We should also not forget that in Boulogne-sur-Mer, there's the first farm for fish in Europe. Several thousands of jobs are at stake here. The Brexit consequences are also felt with the UK, with which France has a positive trade balance. The positive trade balance with the UK in 2019 amounted to 12.5 billion euros for France. Of course, there aren't countries, unfortunately, with which we have a positive trade balance in France. Given the return of the borders, these trade exchanges dropped since the start of the year. They dropped by 30%. From the UK to the continent, they dropped by 60%. The British meat producers associations raised the alarm regarding the Brexit consequences, emphasizing the weaknesses of the importation systems, the mountain of red tape, and the loss of trade. Today, there's also the issue of people's mobility and the impact of Brexit on the possibility for the French to work or study in the UK. But of course, that always goes the other way around, also for tourism. In our resort, up to 25% of our customer base is British in our hotels, so that question should be raised, and we will have a roundtable regarding tourism. Last topic that we're going to mention today, the migration issue, and especially in the Côte d'Opale. The Minister of the Interior, Gérald Darmanin, said that he negotiated with the UK additional means to prevent the border crossing along the channel. It's a mistake. Illegal crossings of the channel increased by 4 times compared to 2019. The Maritime Prefecture in France counted up to 900 crossings for only 200 crossings in 2019, and with much more people as well. So clearly the issue not solved, and it actually worsened. All of this proves that the government did not take the right measures, and this topic is still on the table. The Touquet agreement is an agreement that deals with relationships and not with Brexit, but this is of course related to Brexit that we are going to talk about today. Will it be a fresh start? Well, we hope it will be, as also for the migration issue. And the migration issue will be the last topic of the day. So divorce or fresh start? Well, we all hope that Brexit will be tantamount to a fresh start with our relationship with the UK. In this regard, the agreement that was negotiated and is going to be ratified by the European Parliament is laying solid foundations for the future. And I salute the decisive action by Michel Barnier, who is going to introduce this seminar. Thanks to him, we were able to preserve the unity of the 27 European Union members, sharing our interests and laying the basis for a lasting relationship. I'd also like to thank everyone for participating today. Of course, we have people with great talents with us. I can't all their names, but I'd like to welcome in particular Clément Beaune, Secretary of State for the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, and Ambassador Liu Lin as well, British Ambassador to France. I'd also like to thank the CCI Hauts-de-France and his chair, François Lavallée, for their support. I'd also like to thank the Université Littoral Côte d'Opale and its chair as well. The university is one of today's partners. This seminar is the first of its kind since the UK left the European Union on the 1st of January 2021. Brexit invites us to lay the bricks for a new foundation in our relationship with the UK, and it is true that this departure also raises questions regarding the future of the European Union. This is, of course, a failure. So our 4 roundtables are going to look at whether Brexit can also be a fresh start for the EU beyond. Alex Taylor is going to moderate the 4 roundtables. He is a journalist, expert in Europe, often organizing conferences on Brexit. He also wrote a book, Brexit, Autopsy of Illusions. He is French and British, so he, of course, will be very well positioned for our debates. He also works for France 3, and he worked for France Inter for years, also for Arte Euronews, the parliamentary channel, Europe 1 and RFI. So, of course, he was the best embodiment of the union between our countries. He's British-born. So before launching the debates, we're going to listen to Michel Barnier, who was at the heart of the negotiation for 4.5 years. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Barnier. Thank you all, and have a productive day.
Many thanks, Daniel. Good morning to all of you. But just to give a proof of the cultural diversity we need to maintain everywhere, I will switch to French, if I may, immediately. Chers amis,
dear friends, and all, and good morning to those who are listening elsewhere online. I'm delighted to be here with you, together with Julian King, that I knew well. He is a former British commissioner. He was very active. See partners, people who participated in our debates. I'd like to also welcome Sir Edward Llewellyn, British Ambassador to France, the Secretary of State Clément Beaune, and Xavier Bertrand, the President of this beautiful region, the Hauts-de-France. I'd also like to welcome the members of Parliament, Senator. Welcome. I'd also like to thank Daniel Fasquelle, who with his municipal team decided to organize this first major seminar at a very good time, for a seminar on Brexit. Also like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the University of the Côte d'Opale in particular as well. I'd like to thank, of course, all the speakers for being here today. First of all, a quick word to thank the Mayor Daniel Fasquelle, thanking for his long-lasting friendship and the initiative that he launched. In my public life, I've always thought that the followers effect is as important as the announcement effect. And oftentimes citizens are concerned, and rightly so, when they see that some announcements aren't followed by actions and that some laws, some bills aren't reviewed or evaluated. And I think that a few months after the conclusion of this first agreement, it's not too early to start to think together about its consequences together in France with the EU and with the British to preserve the spirit of cooperation with this great people and this great country that UK is. So, Daniel, thank you very much for organizing the seminar here in the Touquet, where we have great historical, cultural, economic relationships with the UK. And today you will see on very concrete topics, humane, economic topics, tourism issues, fishing, trade. You'll see the consequences on all of those topics, and you, I think, will understand why it's important to rigorously review the consequences of this quake that Brexit represented for us and for the EU. So Brexit is a divorce, as indicated in the title of this seminar. And like all divorces, consequences are immense, and I've been saying this right from the start. When I started working in Brussels in autumn 2016 on this topic, I warned about the fact that the human, social, economic, financial, technical, legal, political consequences and that they were generally underestimated and poorly explained, especially in the UK and in France. Brexit is a factor of risk, of uncertainty for our fishermen. Daniel Fasquelle mentioned them, and also beyond universities, for road transport, for farmers, for companies that are importing, exporting, for citizens as well, for the British who are living in France. There's a lot of them, and we're delighted to welcome them, and also for the European citizens working or living in the UK. So during the entire negotiation period for over 4 years, I wanted, of course, to find an agreement with the British. I've dealt with several teams, 2 prime ministers, 4 different negotiators, 1 per year. But I also limit Brexit's consequences on citizens, on companies, on regions. And we negotiated a first treaty that was ratified at the end of 2019, the withdrawal agreement, preserving the citizens' rights. They were acquired until the end of 2020 for all citizens, so 4.5 million people for themselves, for their families. We also found financial agreements. We decided that agreed upon by 28 members was going to be paid for by 28 members to the pound. Also for the controlled labels, for example, for the agneau de Pré-Salé, a specific produce coming from regions like the Beaufort cheese, or other produce as well. Of course, there was also the protocol regarding Ireland and Northern Ireland to avoid physical border on the Irish island. Wanted to protect the fundamental agreement of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. So we found an agreement for the orderly withdrawal of the UK from the EU, which was not a given. And then we had several We had a different round of negotiation last year. For only a few months, we negotiated another agreement to build the future relationship and organize the trade Brexit. We worked on 4 main issues: free trade agreement, an ambitious and a fair agreement without any border tariffs, no quotas. So we wanted a level playing field to avoid regulatory divergencies to become a dumping tool, whether social or tax dumping tools. So part of the agreement over time, and I hope we'll apply it smartly on both sides of the channel. And there was also a second part of this agreement that was signed on the 24th of December at 4 p.m. We really were running out of time. The other option would have been an orderly Brexit. So the other issue is social and economic cooperation, road transport, air transport, social security, fishing, energy. Regarding fishing, we know how important it is. And yesterday I met with the regional representatives of fishing. They are concerned by the implementation of the agreement. It takes too much time. We still need time to attribute the licenses that they are entitled to, like all fishermen of the agreement, including the British agreements, are entitled to. So I hope that we will implement them smartly.
As I said, I will be fully available to the fishermen, and I will also help the ministers to support fishermen further. Third part, the citizens' safety. Here again, we want to cooperate with Europol, Eurojust. We have to work on extradition. The fight against money laundering is also on the agenda. And we need some rules of governance to ensure, over time, some degree of continuity and effectiveness and efficiency of our partnership. So this is what we have in this agreement. And of course, this is just an overview. And it's the first answer to this question raised by the conference: divorce or a fresh start? I would say both at the same time. Brexit is both a divorce and a fresh start. It is a divorce because it is a weakening, mutual weakening for the UK region where we are today, which is the exist, for our country, for Europe in general. It's a weakening of the system. And again, we need to have an orderly agreement, and there has been a weakening of the system. Yesterday, I met with the head of MEDEF, but also the head of the Chamber of Commerce and Trade of this region. And they were explaining to me that over and beyond this COVID public health crisis, which of course is a very serious element, and that impacts the quality of dialogue between the EU France. By the way, we have to remember that 100,000 people have died in our country of COVID, and many others have died in the neighboring countries. A lot of people are sick or suffering, some are dead. There are serious, very violent consequences on the companies, on small and medium-sized businesses, on youth. It's taken its toll on youth. This is a particularly serious situation, as we know. But over and beyond the sheer impact of the COVID crisis and its consequences, we have, directors of harbor authorities who are being impacted. They know that there's a drop between 15 to 20%. We think it's a sustainable trend in our trade with the UK. So an impact on trade. The most sensitive issue and the most serious issue for me is what's happening in Ireland, where fragile peace has been established. I'm sure that we have Julian who will. Very fragile peace was obtained and secured 20 years ago after a conflict that led to 4,000 casualties. Now, we need this peace to be sustainable. And for that, we need no borders. We need to continue cooperating between the North and the South, together with Theresa May, together with Boris Johnson. I listened to them very patiently. I listened to their views. I looked for the ways and means to actually put on the table concrete and fully operational solutions. Solutions to the problems created by a Brexit in Ireland. The problem today in Ireland is Brexit and its mechanical consequences. We don't want to build a border in the middle of the island between Northern Ireland, in other words, the UK, and Southern Ireland. We have to control the products entering the island, however. Let me remind you that a cow, an animal, for example, arriving from England to Belfast, it's in the same country because we're talking about the United Kingdom. The cow arrives on French territory because it's going to end up on the single market. Therefore, we have an obligation vis-à-vis the consumers, vis-à-vis the farmers, vis-à-vis the community in general, to control the arrival of the goods, as we do with all of our external borders, the external borders of the EU. That's exactly what is at stake. I've never talked about actual borders. I'm talking about checks and controls that we need to perform at borders. Nothing overly serious. However, these are technical formalities, concrete formalities that need to be performed in order to protect all of the consumers in Ireland, in order to protect all of the European and also the British consumers. And it has to be mutual protection. Here again, I think and I hope that intelligence and responsibility shall prevail. Now, we need to show mutual responsibility. And if we do, let me say that I'm convinced that we will be able to gradually limit and restrict the consequences of this divorce, quote unquote. And I hope that together with the UK, we'll be able to take a fresh start. That's always been in the back of my mind during the negotiation rounds, ladies and gentlemen, because I think that over and beyond Brexit, if we look at what is looming on the horizon, what we're looking into the future, today, day after tomorrow, there's so many risks, challenges, stakes out there that will, in fact, impact us necessarily, that will jeopardize our ways, that will, disrupt our ways. There's so many, hazards out there that we will have to stand united to face up to these challenges together. Unfortunately, there will be further pandemics, other viruses that will rage and that will impact men and women. And there will also be, by the way, animal pandemics. I know this, and I know this for a fact because I'm the former Minister in charge of Agriculture and Fisheries. So there will be further impacts due to pandemics. And this is something that we've seen emerge for the last 10 years. We have a global warming, something that will change all of our habits is indeed global warming. That's a hazard too. Another risk, of course, is that of financial instability. We're talking about global finance, which is not fully under control, far from it. We saw about 10 years ago what can happen, with the financial crisis in 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, these risks, these hazards are in front of us, and they will hit the UK as well as they will impact the EU. We are no longer in the same union, granted, but I think it's absolutely vital for us to preserve ways and means of cooperation on an operational level. We need to concretely be able to act as one when the time comes. And of course, we also have to keep our migratory flows under control, as was mentioned by Daniel Pascal. So it's a fresh start, for sure, in the Franco-British cooperation and in the cooperation between the EU and the UK. Now, if you will allow me to take this opportunity to say a few words about another new fresh start that we need to make for us, countries of Europe, after the Brexit step. We could feel some nostalgia. Hopefully, there will be some nostalgia felt also on the British side to leave the Union. I mean, I saw this throughout the negotiation process. There was a strong determination on the part of the British negotiators to secure the advantages and the benefits of the single market without being part of it. I thought probably they felt some kind of nostalgia for the single market if they wanted to reap the benefits therefrom. But never mind. Nostalgia is never a good advisor. I think that the time has come for us, countries of the European Union, to take our fate into our hands and to take our own fresh start. Here again, before we do that, we could choose new ways, new avenues to explore. We could draw some lessons from Brexit for ourselves. It is now too late for the UK, granted, but not for us. Let us ask ourselves why, in some cases, we had this figure of 52% at the referendum, 52% of citizens voted against Brussels, against the EU, so much so that they actually ended up leaving the Union. And these are reasons that we could find, of course, not just in the UK, but also here in France, in the northern or eastern part of France, in Belgium also, citizens who, want to leave the EU. Citizens sometimes have a feeling that the EU does not respond to the legitimate desires of citizens. There's some kind of a social unrest or anger, one might say, because there's no protection of our external borders, some people say, or because the EU cannot control these immigration flows that are impacting us. Europe has not been able to preserve everywhere in the UK, but also in France and in other countries, its industry, and has not been able to anticipate on digital revolution. And Europe is also often criticized for its red tape and complexity. And that's the reason why I think that here in Le Touquet today, during this conference and in the months ahead, this time is a good opportunity to talk about the future of Europe, of the reforms and the changes that we need to make. And it's an urgent situation in the world as it currently stands. Nobody's asking us for permission anymore, ladies and gentlemen. Countries like China, India are major countries now around the table together with the United States, who've been there from day one. We also have Russia and Brazil around the table, the large countries, continental countries that have sufficient resources, space, big populations to count on their own, to exist on their own, to sit around the table and sit there for good. And these countries will participate to the order of the world, the new order of the world. So the question that we might ask ourselves in all of our European states or countries, and of course, we will try to make a different answer from the British one. How can we occupy the seat at the table with other countries that I mentioned? How do we participate in the order or orders of this world? How will we go about making our voices heard, upholding our values, upholding our interests? I think that if we don't stand united, we just won't sit at the table. If we don't rely on the single market that was built with a great deal of patience for 47 or 50 years, then we don't exist at all. We need to stand united. Otherwise, we will just be looking at what's happening out there without having our fate in our own hands. Of course, I've been in politics and I want to be in politics, but I want to be stakeholders. I don't want to be a subcontractor or an onlooker, if you like. China is becoming a strategic country, same with Russia and Turkey. They are trying to, in this tug of war, to benefit from our weakness. The United States, they've now exited the Trump era, and they have other priorities than that of the European Union. They don't share the same priorities. Now, we could see the technological impacts made by large multinational companies, and they will spare nobody's interests. And look at what's happening in China. Let me say again, my deeply held belief, ladies and gentlemen, that I will always keep. I do not want the future of our children, of our grandchildren, to be shaped by Washington or Beijing. We have to take our fate into our own hands. And for that, we have to put Europe in the right direction. The French presidency will be for 6 months, of course, in the first half of 2022. And this is an opportunity to, give some guidelines. I remember the previous French presidency back in 2008 with Nicolas Sarkozy as a president, the then president of France. And I remember that we had a collective ambition and we had, moved things forward. And we had shaped a number of changes, and that's what we need to do in the 6 months of this upcoming presidency in 2022, at a time where I hope we will be able to exit, to get out of this economic and social crisis, but with a great deal of casualties, human and social consequences. We have to get out of what I would call this European candor in our exchanges. We need a French ambition. I think that Europe has always been a French ambition, shared, of course, with other countries. Now, if you allow me, I would like to say that there are 6 major projects ahead of us. We need to give an impulse to all of these projects. And of course, we need to keep up the momentum later on when other countries take over. And this is the key for our independence and wealth and prosperity over and beyond the COVID crisis, once again, which has shown, by the way, the added value as well as the limitations of our common action. The first project is health and environment. I believe that in each and every one of our countries, in France in particular, we have to restart our innovation and research capabilities in the field of health and environment. We need Europe to be able to keep the major risks under control, and it needs to have a means of coordination of domestic efforts. We have to have an international treaty on the management and preparedness for large pandemics. What is true for health is also true for the environment and for our planet Earth in general. The European Commission has offered more resources for environmental transition, research, and innovation. And when we talk about the environment, we're not talking about something theoretical. It's not just an ideology. It's really the research for effective answers to the consequences of global warming. Here again, we have to wage a battle and, in favor of biodiversity, in favor of sustainability. We have to continue building this new global consensus for the climate. So that's the number 1 priority. The second priority is that of course, economic recovery. Again, for the first time, the countries of the European Union, and I think that, by the way, if the UK had stayed, despite what some people might say, the UK, for the first time, actually had agreed on this. We need to pool our loans. We have 750 billion euros for the recovery plan. It's much less, of course, than the stimulus package in the United States, but 750 billion is quite an amount. In the United States, of course, in this stimulus package, there are things that we do individually in every country, and that's part of their plan. And we will have to continue investing and borrowing more together, pooling these loans and resources for the future. So financial effort will be needed. We need to pool our debt, and the European Central Bank is both realistic and wise, and we've been able to capitalize on that. And this is proof that we can look into the future together, all 27 of us, into the future, as I said. But we will need to prepare the way for the future and develop our own resources in Europe without creating and levying new taxes that would weigh on our citizens and our companies. And we need the digital giants to make a contribution to this financial effort. And we also have imported goods that do not comply with our environmental duties and rules that will have to be taxed. So this is something that is fair, and we started discussing this in 2009. This carbon adjustment at borders should be introduced. And we want to avoid arrogance. We want to listen and understand on this particular point the position of our European partners. In the second project or priority, the economic recovery, we have to set new budgetary rules over and beyond the Stability Pact, the 3% rule that has shown the limitation of our system. We need new rules to sustain national budgets for sound management. And we have the investment expenditure that is needed for the future and others that could be avoided. Let's hope that the recovery would be sustainable, and it will be sustainable only it is based on sound foundations. Companies represented by many of you know very well that we can't invest, take risks if we are on a fragile foundation. The foundation is the single market. It needs to be strong. It can be further consolidated and strengthened. But if it were to be hit once again by a major crisis, such as the one in 2008, then the floor, the foundations would be very unstable. Nobody would want to invest and take risks. So I'm asking people to be vigilant. I'm talking here about the risks on financial markets that will loom on the horizon tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We need to continue implementing rules, regulation, supervision, oversight in an area that is, by the way, not covered by the agreement. It's called shadow banking. And let me reiterate the proposal I made in 2014 to create a position as a European financial prosecutor that could prosecute any kind of failure to apply the rules. So number three priority, technological and digital challenge. We saw with COVID that digital technology really has an impact on all of our activities. It is pervasive, and we are lagging behind in this area. We've probably already lost the battle of artificial intelligence. A lot of the investments on AI happen in the United States and in China, but not here in Europe, but in other areas of other technologies. We can invest and win the battle, quantum IT, neuro technologies, and others. We won't be able to fight this battle alone. So together with our partners in Europe, we need to work on that. And the French presidency is an opportunity to give an impetus to this priority. For example, we could have the creation of a European fund of technological sovereignty that would be, in fact, using some of the savings accumulated in Europe and could feed into this fund. We also have an ecosystem that we need to implement in favor of what we call the unicorns, to support unicorns or sources of innovation, give them an opportunity to remain European and avoid the brain drain and the drain of investments from Europe to other countries. Maybe we need a European authority for regulating artificial intelligence. We need to fight against algorithms that thwart competition or that distort competition. Then number four, the fourth priority, justice. We were talking about a social unrest or social anger earlier on. Europe has always been overly based on the market, on the free market rules. Nobody should lose their jobs because of social dumping. The rules for seconding European workers have changed. We need to strengthen oversight to avoid deviations. We need to attack any kind of or challenge any kind of imported dumping practices, and we know that they exist in our agreement with the UK. We have some rules for level playing fields in order to ward off this kind of social dumping, and I think it would be a good lab for new ideas, a good way of experimenting with these ideas. We need competition rules that are free and fair, as we say, free and fair competition rules. I think that our recovery plan should benefit all of the territories of the Union, including the most remote countries, including overseas France, and should also benefit the youngest citizens amongst us. Just one word regarding youth, by the way, just to stress that it is very useful to preserve a program that the UK has decided to withdraw from, and I think it's too bad. It's Erasmus, and that's too bad because it's a pity, because this program in favor of youth has mobilized a great deal of money and could be further expanded. It's one of the most beautiful human and collective successes of the European Union, and it has supported a professional mobility project in many regions. I think we need to go one step further. France should offer the creation of several European universities that would be really European. We're not talking about cooperation between different domestic universities, and this is something that we're already encouraging, but we need fully fledged European universities worthy of that name. Another priority, the fifth one, is that of migration flows. I touched upon the subject, and so did Daniel Fasquelle earlier on. We need to keep that under control. And Europe has to be up to expectations and up to its values by welcoming, citizens who are persecuted in their countries. But we can't open our borders to everyone. We can't be overly candid or naive. We need to really control our external borders better. 10,000 people are going to be looking at the external borders, and these external borders have not been managed as they should have been in the past. We need to look at the asylum right and asylum law to see who should be welcomed in our country and who shouldn't be. We should shorten the time to deport illegal citizens. And we should also implement a legal immigration policy based on our needs too, so that large countries, Australia or the United States, offer green cards, and we could offer a blue card. It could be a residence permit based on quotas that could be granted based on our needs, more legible and more concrete immigration policy. And this would be true to welcome European citizens and other people who would like to stay in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe has to assert its presence on the international stage, and this is being completely reshuffled. We saw the Ukraine, Eastern Mediterranean countries, and we can see that there's a need for more united Europe, but the European Union is not yet mature enough to assert its presence and inspire respect. And there are reasons for this. The first one being that it takes time to assert your presence on the international stage. It takes a lot of time. It's not something that happens overnight. It can't be improvised. When there is a crisis, it's difficult to assert your presence. And it's true, because there are 27 of us, 27 sovereign states. So it's difficult. We need to show some kind of indulgence vis-à-vis European institutions for their foreign policy and foreign defense policy. They only have the room for maneuver that is left to them by the 27 sovereign states of the European Union. There are also other reasons that we don't always have an opportunity to explain openly, and we don't really dare to grapple with these difficulties, and we will have to face them squarely. We have been in favor of instruments, commercial, diplomatic instruments and resources, and we thought that accumulating these instruments would mechanically lead to the expression of a common political will. Now, today, we discover, or we are about to discover, that all of these means and instruments, which of course are ways of carrying out our action, have no impact and no visibility if we are not put at the service of actual political desires that are actively promoted, upheld, and defended. And here we have a responsibility. The responsibility of the 27 countries is central. Talking about the foreign and defense policy, we have to make sure that the instruments that we have is connected to the interests that we want to uphold. So some people are less naive, less candid than we are. And Europe has been very reluctant to formulate its own interests and instruments in order to support these desires. So we have a tectonic change, a new tug of war being established. It's more violent than it used to be. Unilateral initiatives are introduced, and often they are hostile to the values and the model that we would like to express and embody. And this means that Europeans have to look at the world squarely in the face and assume their geopolitical responsibilities. This is already the meaning, I think, of what has been done here in Saint-Malo in France back in 1998 between the French and the British. Only the context has changed, the stakeholders have changed, and I'm very sorry to see that Brexit has negatively impacted this ability to work with the Brits when it comes to foreign and defense policy. So we should be talking about that, about defense, foreign policy and cooperation. I did not always understand why there was a reluctance not to talk about this. It's not been part of the agreement. We need to exist by ourselves in this uncertain and volatile world. And this need is even more acute today than it was in the past. So in a nutshell, I would like to conclude. I took quite some time and very sorry for that. Health, economic recovery, technical and digital priorities, justice, migrations. These are the collective ambitions that we need to have in order to serve France and the rest of the European Union, to move things forward, as I was saying, to change, to move forward, to forge ahead. Our country needs to be able to convince that we can't impose anything top down. I believe in French influence, but it is not something that is a given. It is not improvised. It's something that's built gradually. We need to pay attention to other people. We need to bring to the fore our ideas. We need time to explain. So I also think that we should leave arrogance by the wayside. And this is often been said as typical of our attitude. Patiently, we need to build our French influence, and we need to build what I would call a dynamic consensus. I think that we will need to discuss at home about these topics that have been very divisive and have led to many different divisions, French in public opinion. So European patriotism is a word that I coined, a good expression, I think. We need to talk amongst ourselves. Those who entertain fear about Europe or demagogy, the source of demagogy is silence and the lack of a public debate.
J'ai saisi cette occasion pour vous dire quelques-unes de mes convictions, ou plutôt les confirmer.
Ladies and gentlemen, I took this opportunity to share with you some of my strongly held beliefs and some of the opportunities that I believe we have ahead of us. It's been an honor for me over 4.5 years to head up the mission that aimed to serve the unity of the 27 members of the European Union. And that did not just fall from the sky either. Our goal was to make sure that Brexit would not endanger our shared asset, which is the European Union, our free trade agreements, and our unity. And I say once again, as I have written in the past, that we must draw lessons from Brexit. It is our responsibility to understand why the British left. They want us now to cooperate in a different way, but it's important for us to listen to the anger that was expressed in the UK and to implement the kind of changes that are necessary to better understand and reassure the European citizens that remain. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Michel Barnier. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michel Barnier. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A round of applause once again. Thank you for opening these discussions for this day of speeches. I'm going to be your host today. Let's just share a few words for the people who are tuned in on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Rest assured that the room is not packed at all, and we are all social distancing as we should. We have entire empty rows, plenty of hand solution. We've in fact handed out masks as well. The people on the stage are wearing masks as well. And I know that Brexit can also alight the passions. So I wouldn't want to presuppose any reactions coming from the room. Without further ado, let's welcome our first round of guests onto the stage. We can get the microphones. Thank you for being with us. Julian Kings, first of all, former British Commissioner to the European Commission and former Ambassador of the UK to Paris. A round of applause. Thank you very much for being with us. Patrick Martin. You work for the MEDEF Union and you also own a company. And Yann Leriche, Deputy Director General of DebtLink Eurotunnel. And I believe that we have a video link with Jarl Seven from the Owen Mumford Limited company based in Oxfordshire. Are you with us? I think that in just a few seconds, we'll be able to see them on our screens. Let us therefore open up our first round table, which aims to answer a very simple question. Is Brexit a new beginning, or is it not? It's a divorce, but is it a new beginning for the European Union?
Nous allons ouvrir cette première table ronde avec une vidéo.
We're going to be opening up this first round table with a video from Clément Beaune, Secretary of State for European Affairs in France. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you, even though it is through video, to this day of sharing. I'd also like to thank the Mayor of Le Touquet, Xavier Bertrand, and also Michel Barnier, who headed up the Brexit negotiation whilst always unwaveringly defending the interests of Europe. I'd also like to welcome all of the economic, political players and all of the ambassadors with us here today who have been working on the relationship post-Brexit, which is now our world since the 1st of January. What are the lessons that can be learned from the first 3 months and from negotiations as a whole? Well, once again, I would like to thank Michel Barnier for his work, because Europe has managed to remain united and firm behind its lead negotiator, and under the direction of France and Germany especially. That was not a given back in 2016. People thought that this was the beginning of the end for Europe. But we have been able to show that we can be agile, that we can react, that we can be consistent in defending our interests in a firm way to defend the greatest European assets, the single market, and our political unity. And these are lessons that we must all keep in mind as Europe is facing more difficulties. Europe is being accused of being weak and slow, but through this negotiation, we've been able to show the strength of our European bloc, and that should be a lesson for the future. We also have a new world, a new relationship to construct post-Brexit. This agreement maintains what is the most important, the interests of French and European fishermen. That was a core priority for the President of the French Republic and for all local, regional, and professional stakeholders. And we fought for that together, and we got significant results. Brexit, of course, is bad news for basically everyone, and especially for fishermen. That's something that we recognize, but we have been able to help prevail the interests of that industry. What is important now is the full application of the agreement as stated, and we have not got to that point yet. We've been fighting since the 1st of January so that the licenses are given to our fishermen, so that their rights to access the fishing zones are guaranteed. This is a fight that has been fought since the 1st of January, but we have not won yet. We will continue, and we will continue to be firm, working with the Minister for the Oceans to win out. And we must already think about what will happen for fishermen after 2026, which is the point at which we will renegotiate the access to fishing waters, and that needs to be started today. The core of this is making sure that our economic interests are taken into account. In the agreement, if there were deviances from the UK, we would have tools, legal instruments through which we could react. And this should be a model for many economic agreements going forward. We also expect from the European Union the commercial tools to react quickly if we did see shifts or dumping. This is how we will defend ourselves, through the application and the defense of the agreement. This is how we defend our market, competition, and our interests. And the agreement also allows for this, but we must also defend it. We need to build a new relationship with the UK. It's neither in our own nor in the UK's interest, nor in anyone else's, to separate, to drift apart. In the north of France especially, we see the issues at play: migration, people, free movement, and happiness. These will be the challenges that we face over the coming months, and I hope that we will show the same strength and unity going forward so that France can be a warden for our goals on scientific cooperation, migration, climate change, and so many other fields that bring us together and will continue to bring us together no matter the circumstances. France, the UK, and Europe will remain united to defend beyond our own interests our history, our values, and our culture. That is what we will be doing in the coming months and years, and I know that this is a shared fight. Thank you. Thank you very much, Clément Bon. A round of applause for him, even though he can't actually hear us. To kick off our work on Brexit and the European Union, the Brexit event, is this a new beginning or a last-ditch attempt? Let me tell you about how we're going to organize this debate, first of all. I'm going to be giving you 5 minutes from the get-go to express your interests and where you're coming from. It's very interesting always to have debates with you. So if you could maybe keep your introductory remarks to 5 minutes. And if you have any questions or comments, if you're in the room with us or if you're watching online, you can send us your questions in. And if you have any questions or comments in the room, I will relay them to our panel here. So let's do this next part in French. So just 5 minutes for you for the single question. Is Brexit for you a final ditch attempt for the single market or a new beginning? Well, first of all, I would like to state that I was completely against this. I did campaign against Brexit, not against the single market, of course, against Brexit. But the vote is what it is. And a new government was elected on that basis. And what's done is done. But as Michel Barnier said, we need to look forward. And I am now in favor for tying the tightest relationship possible with the UK. If we look at the situation today, there's a whole range of possibilities and things that we could do for the relations between the UK and the remaining 27. This can range anywhere from close ties, which is what I want, all the way to tooth and nail competition, and that is what could happen if we're not careful. Our common interests should naturally lead us to cooperation. But if we look at the facts today, relations have not begun smoothly. There's a lack of trust on both sides. And there's even a lack of desire to engage on both sides. People are dragging their feet in wanting to tie these close relations. Today, as it stands, there is no fully functional ambassador in London or Brussels on either side. As Michel Barnier said, as it stands, there is no structure to relations in important fields: international affairs, international security and defense. The agreement on our future relations has still not been ratified. It simply doesn't exist in a legal sense at this point. And even with that agreement once ratified, there will still be important issues without answers. What do we do about Northern Ireland? If we're not careful, unfortunately, that is a dry powder keg. What do we do for financial services in a way that works for everyone, for the 27 and for the UK? How do we organize digital technologies? How do we protect data? These are all issues that still need to be answered. How can we make sure, as Michel Barnier said once again, that we can ensure fair competition going forward? How can we manage regulatory bodies? We need to still find answers on all of these issues so that we can, together, face other challenges the future challenges that Michel Barnier once again mentioned. We need to manage COVID together. We need to avoid fighting over vaccines. It's not like you've got these evil Anglo-Saxon vaccines and the good European vaccines. If we fall into that trap, how can we then support COVAX and vaccinating the rest of the world? We need to support the economic recovery of our region, the European region. And we've got China on one side and we've got the US on the other. Both of them are investing huge amounts of money. We're seeing staggering growth. But if you look at Europe, if you look at these particular challenges, these future challenges, then getting along is simply a necessity, because we're not going to stop being neighbors anytime soon. And this is especially true in the north of France, especially here in Le Touquet. We have to get over the divorce and start again, but it's not going to be easy. Thank you for that introduction. Just a few questions about what you said. We gathered your standpoint, but we'll get back to you. Okay, so you are part of the MEDEF union and also the head of a company. So a question for you. Basically, what we're here talking about today, is this the last chance for the single market, or is it a new beginning, or is it neither? In 5 minutes. Well, I'd first of all like to say hello to everyone, especially Michel Barnier, who I'd like to thank for the amazing work that he did in the very difficult circumstances that he had to work in. He really was saving what could be saved in the nicest sense of the word. The situation as it is disastrous. This isn't good for French companies. All French companies are very pro-EU, and this is a setback for them. That being said, we are democratic and we're not here to question the sovereign decision that was made by the British. That doesn't mean that the situation is good and won't create all sorts of problems going forward. Brexit has occurred in a situation that none of us could have predicted, which adds a further level of difficulty and complexity. Of course, by that I mean the health crisis and its social and economic impact. Brexit will weigh down the growth of ourselves and of the UK right at the time when we need that growth to get out of COVID. And that could have been predicted, although COVID couldn't. COVID also occurred at a difficult time geopolitically and economically. Things are getting more competitive, sometimes more violent. If we look forward to look at how we could all weather this storm, things are uncertain. So a lot of issues, and I'm not going to get into the figures, the microeconomics of the situation between the UK and France at the moment, but I would like to say that the UK is one of the few countries that France has a positive trade balance with. And even properly negotiated and managed, Brexit is going to introduce negative effects in our economic relations. But this is a moment of truth. It does show things as they are. I don't know whether we can measure at this point the impact of Brexit in the European conscience. Michel Barnier did mention the European Central Bank. The UK doesn't use the euro, but the European Commission, throughout the recovery plan, has shown its intent. We don't know at this point whether the economic recovery plan would be the same if Brexit hadn't happened. Brexit has been a moment of reckoning for lots of European citizens and for politicians who realize that we can't all just keep playing the fiddle in our own corners. And I think that that's a good thing. It's unfortunate that we had to come to this, to realize this, though. The European project is far from achieved, and we are seeing a lot of difficult political decisions that were made last summer that have slowed down the deployment of the European Recovery Plan. So there are some good things, but there are also definitely some not good things. As the head of a company and also as a representative of company owners around France, my opinion is that UK voters, a small majority of UK voters, basically punished the EU for being overly complex, overly heavy, overly bound by red tape at a time when challenges were becoming harder and harder to face. And right now, for companies and for countries, we need to be ever more agile, ever more proactive. If the setback that is Brexit leads us to refocus on our priorities and get rid of some of the maybe arrogance on the side of France to move towards more common sense, and our love-hate relationship with the UK shouldn't prevent us from realizing that British people are fundamentally pragmatic and forward-thinking, and I think we should definitely draw lessons from what happened. Thank you very much. We do have interpreters with us. Amour vache in France is a love-hate relationship, which is an interesting term in France. Let's move now on to Jarl 7. I believe you can hear us.
I presume.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Si vous nous regardez sur le web, vous avez la traduction.
If you're watching online, you do have interpreters available to you.
Parce que ce serait trop difficile de faire une traduction par-dessus la voix qu'on entend en distanciel, mais je vous donnerai un petit résumé si vraiment vous voulez à la fin des propos. So, Mr. Seven, you're the Director General of OM Mumford Limited, which is based in Oxfordshire. You sell medicine. You employ 800 people and 85% of your volume is abroad. Can you tell us what your take on this is? Do you think that this is in some way a new start for your trade with Europe and with the rest of the world, or is this something very difficult for you? What is your take now?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize for not speaking in French. I speak 4 languages, but unfortunately, French is not one. With regards to the consequences of Brexit on our business, we believe, I believe, that it's going to be pretty much business as usual after a period of time. I think 2021 is going to be a learning curve for us, where we're all going to experience and learn the new rules, the regulations, and the way of working together with the EU. But business will overcome those challenges in the short to medium term. And I think it'll balance out and settle down, and we're going to have a good, normal trading relationship. I do think politically, we will be encouraged to seek business beyond Europe. And certainly that's been the rhetoric so far in the UK. And I do think for EU as well, there's so many opportunities outside of the European Union and outside of the geographic region of Europe. So I think that natural expansion and globalization and internationalization of business is going to gather some pace over the next few years. I think also, unfortunately, the pandemic has at the same time opened our eyes to new ways of doing business. Where we were restricted before by the sheer logistics and travel and so on, I think using technology such as this really has brought home to many of us that we can actually talk to customers and suppliers and partners all around the world in an effective and constructive way without physically being there. So I think that is also going to open up a new chapter in how we do business internationally, not just for Britain alone and not just for our business, but generally. Within the EU, I think the challenges that we've had in the initial period has been administrative. The fact that we now have to have proof of export for our customers, we have to have much more paperwork in importing materials. All of that is a learning curve that we will go through and we're suffering a little bit from. But once it becomes routine, I think that just becomes part of doing business in a normal way. I think most businesses will adjust and adapt to those changes. There are some practical things, such as employees coming to the UK. As a reasonably small company, I have 600 people in Oxfordshire and 200 people around the world. Of the 600 people in Oxfordshire, 176 of them are non-British, 176 out of 600. And out of that 176, about 3/4 are from within the EU. I think that's going to change a fair bit in the short to medium term. I think it's going to be more difficult to encourage residents of the EU to come to the UK and work simply because of the perceived administration burden that may be coming their way if they choose to relocate to the UK. Certainly already we're feeling that. We're finding it much harder to encourage Italian designers and German engineers to come and work with us in the UK. So that's an immediate challenge which I hope we'll overcome in the medium to long term. But in the short term, we will feel that. So overall, I think a bumpy year, Brexit combined with pandemic, not an ideal combination for anybody, never mind business. But I do believe as we exit 2021, things will settle down and business will find a way forward.
Thank you very much indeed for that introductory statement. Bon, je vous résume tout en une phrase.
Just in a nutshell, for those of you in the room who don't speak English, basically business as usual. Things are difficult right now, but things will get easier going forward. And Mr. Seven also discussed the issues with his human resources. 176 of his employees in the UK are from EU states, which leads to issues when it comes to mobility for work. This is a very concrete issue for him right now. But as I understood him, in the medium long term, things will get back to business as usual. So staying in French, Jeanne Le Riche, you are the Deputy Director General of Getlink Eurotunnel. I discussed things with you a little bit earlier because you have a US perspective on this. You worked in the US for a while. So you've got a Euro-French perspective on this, but also an American perspective on the single market. So the same question for you, which is the main question of this round table. To what degree is this a new beginning, or do you believe that this is the last chance for the single market? What is your opinion of the single market from a US perspective especially? Good morning, everyone. Yes, at Getlink Eurotunnel, we're something of a canary in the mine for the relations between the UK and France. 1/4 of economic trade goes through the tunnel. And it's from that perspective that I can look at what's going on between the UK and France. And I'd like to start with an analogy. As we look at the future of a market, in this case, the European single market, let me compare it to what's happening with digital technology. Digital technology, of course, is affecting every company around the world. When you're in the US and when you're in Europe, the question is not being asked in the same way. So I can only speak to the two countries that I know the best, but digital technologies are a change in the market to which we adapt. Companies are implementing their digital transformation to maintain their competitive edge as new technologies come in that people need to understand and adapt to so that companies can use them to their advantage. As an American, people don't adapt to digital technology. Digital technology is there. These are tools. And the Americans want to use that technology to change the world. This is something that's happening in California, but not only. Young people come out of university, 25 years old, and they try to change the world. When you go from the Americans trying to change the world when they're 25 and you come back to Europe looking at Brexit's impact on the single market, this isn't negative or positive, but you need to remember that things are only what you make of them. What do we want here? Do we want to turn the single market into a world leader, as Michel Barnier said, take grip of our own destiny and drive towards the future in a way that's not dictated by Washington or Beijing? And if we want to do that, what is the drive behind it? How much do we want to do that? What is the drive in the economic and political classes to achieve the goals, the ambitious goals that we may set ourselves? So when it comes to the European market, is Brexit good or bad? My answer would be that that isn't really a relevant question. The question really is for Europeans, what do we want to do? How hard do we want to fight to go forward? And that is a question for us and us alone. You must remember that the European Union is the largest European market in the world, still today. This isn't just France, where we're right at the back of the pack. We are leading the pack today. We have a lot of strength in our hands today. So don't forget that as people start to think of the European Union collapsing and crumbling. I have a very proactive attitude on this, and I think we should have, because many others are also thinking proactively and forwardly. I think the Chinese have this mindset that's probably more similar to the US than to Europe, and we need to fight, and the future can be ours.
Great, thank you very much for your introduction. You mentioned several points, which I'd like to have your respective perspectives. Let's start with the elephant in the room, or in the tea shop. Julian, you mentioned the vaccines. I was really struck by the tense relationship that really deteriorated in the past weeks and months because of vaccines, and they were already tense right after Brexit, but they really worsened in recent times. So could we talk about that for a bit, because that's really a concrete example that happened after Brexit. So you who are in the backstage, do you have anything to tell us? Are we going to quickly put that behind us? Because some people were shocked by some reactions in the British press against the European Union, for instance. So do you believe this is just an anecdote because everyone's stressed because of COVID, or do you think this will cause lasting damage? And I think that's very important for the future of the relationship between the UK and the EU. So Julian, do you have any echoes from the backstage? Because I think that the vaccines really deteriorated the relationship from what we can see from the outside. That's why I wanted to raise this point, yes. And my message is simple. We absolutely need to avoid having a vaccine war. That would be more than stupid. So yes, We've had issues inside the EU and between the EU and the UK, but we need to be able to go beyond that. Now there's a gap of about a month between the different vaccination programs. We should focus on that. And we should avoid falling into the trap that I mentioned, saying that on the one side, there are bad vaccines, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, that are, well, the Anglo-Saxon ones. And on the other side, it would be good vaccines, Pfizer and others, that are, well, you guessed it, European. It's also because of the British, because the AstraZeneca vaccine became sort of a mascot of Brexit, didn't it? I'm not sure about that, but I really suggest, and I advise all, that we should avoid a vaccine war, because what can we do then to support COVAX or the vaccination programs in other countries where we should use all vaccines? Patrick Martin, I think you undertook a survey with your members. What can you say about the relationships? Is there an affection issue? Because, well, we talk about a divorce, whether it's regarding vaccines or other topics. Do you feel like there's an affection issue, an emotional issue, that's damaging the good relationship of trade? Well, there's always some element of emotion in our relationships, and I'm not talking here about the actual marriages that took place between people of different nationalities. Well, the MEDEF pulls together 73,000 companies in all sectors, all sizes, everywhere in France and its overseas territories as well. Let's not forget them. There are 120,000 French companies trading with the UK. And pretty much most of them are part of the MEDEF members. So our members are really sensitive to this situation of Brexit. Is it an emotional sensitiveness? No, I think it's rather an objective way of wondering what the consequences of Brexit are going to be on their business. The big companies that are in this region try to understand the consequences of Brexit upstream, actually. Are you talking here about the French side or both sides? On the French side. But for the most smaller companies, despite the messages conveyed by the public authorities, by ourselves as well, the SMEs sort of denied that situation until recently. So we have to recognize the fact that the different changes in the Brexit situation led people to think that perhaps there wouldn't be a Brexit at all, or they didn't know whether it would be a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit. We didn't know exactly what the definitions actually were of those. And actually, yes, it still hasn't been ratified by the European Parliament. That's true, but things are clearer now. So now the SMEs are starting to look into it, because whereas in the past there was sort of denying the existence of Brexit, and that they didn't know how complex this new situation would be and how much red tape there would be. Because amongst those 120,000 companies exporting to the UK, 25% of them never traded outside of the EU before. That's also clearly showing the numerous virtues of the EU, how easy it is, how simple it is to trade within the EU. And that's because of the EU's rules. So that's true for business, but also for universities and so on. The people now, some people, companies like that are discovering quite brutally the situation of exporting to a non-EU country. And that means that some companies that are perhaps less mature or whose activity isn't really focused on the UK, well, those companies might look away and not export to the UK anymore because of the difficulties. And it is going to make the relationship between our two countries poorer on the economic standpoint, but it might have also far-reaching consequences. And that is, of course, disappointing. So there are emotions, but there are also concrete situations here. Well, I noted a contradiction in what you were saying, because on the one hand, the single market makes things simple. You mentioned that. But Michel Barnier also said that we should draw conclusions of the European slowness or the European bureaucracy as well. You mentioned that the European Union was slow as well compared to the United States. Do you think the single market can change things fundamentally? Yeah, because the Brexit is a shock. Well, two things. Going back to the issue of will, I think the will here is the key thing. The European countries are diverse, rich, and there are a lot of opportunities in the EU. It's one of the best places in the world to do business. Let's not forget that. I'd like to echo what was said just before me. Let's not forget that the agreement announced on the 24th of December, 1 week before the 1st of January, after announcements of the delays and postponements. So that means that economic players at the end of December didn't know which agreement was going to come into force 1 week later, because it was announced on the 24th, available a few days later, to come into force on the 1st of January. So yes, since the start of the year, some companies weren't ready. And as was said, probably more the smaller companies than the biggest. But let's not forget as well that even the biggest companies didn't have the agreement at their disposal. So they knew that there would be different rules, but they didn't know which rules. So 3.5 months later, things are going better because they needed some time to digest that agreement that has a lot of pages. Could you give us a concrete example, please? Well, sure. Today, in the agreement, there are very few border quotas or border tariffs from one country to another, but in order to not pay tariffs and not have quotas, you need to justify it. So one of the differences now is that you need to show the paper when you export them, showing that you don't need to pay tariffs. So that's a very technical topic here in the relationship. And when you do that for the first time as a company, when you're exporting and you need to go through this process for the first time, it's complicated. So you are contacting a custom broker, an expert in this regard, and are going to help you do this. And the custom brokers themselves actually are discovering this new text and need to adapt to it and recruit new competences, new skills. So that takes time. Today, these sectors have organized themselves, and all of this also being digitized, so it's going in the right direction. But in the past months, things happened because it all happened sort of overnight, and people needed some time to adapt to it. The entire ecosystem needs time because there are transporters, loaders, the border experts. All of these people need to organize themselves, and it took about 3 months. And today, some people are still struggling a bit, but it is already going much better than in the past.
3 months for you. Has it been it's obviously been a learning process, but are things already better? Or I'm talking about in terms of bureaucracy and processes. Are you seeing a change? And can you give us a few concrete examples of how it was, how it is, and how you see it happening in the next few months?
Of course. In the last few months, January, February, we suffered perhaps disproportionately from the late Brexit deal happening in December, giving everybody in our supply chain very little chance and very little time to adjust and accommodate the requirements in the new world. So January, it was a rough ride for everybody. March, April, things have settled down. A few surprises have caught us out. Sending materials to Northern Ireland, we didn't anticipate to have quite the rocky road that we have experienced. That again is settling down as well now. Getting our customers used to the fact that they've got to make declarations for VAT purposes, for I think the French call it TVA, tax purposes, because we're now not exporting within the EU, we're now exporting from outside the EU into the EU. So little changes like that, practical things where customers have to make their declarations of export, or we have to do it for importing. The Incoterms of our customers have had to change. The insurance has had to change. You know, who takes the liability for insurance? Standard Ex Works terms used to work fine before. Now we're having to renegotiate terms with our suppliers and our customers to take into consideration the new world situation Brexit-wise. So these are sort of very practical examples. With regards to what I mentioned earlier, the general administration of importing and exporting, the learning curve is coming to an end already, which I'm pleased to say has been quicker than I thought. We're now in April. I think the next 6 months, it's going to be much smoother, and you can already feel our customers and suppliers settling down, and that's helping a lot. But it is offset by this extraordinary pandemic situation where, you know, shipping from around the world is being lost in docks and delayed significantly, and prices are going through the roof on some raw materials. So to separate that from the Brexit effect is actually a little bit of a challenge. So we're taking both on the chin and dealing with them both, but what exactly is Brexit related, what exactly is pandemic, gets a little blurry on some of the consequences that we're facing.
Donc difficile de faire la part de ce qui revient au Brexit.
So it's hard to understand clearly what's linked to Brexit and what's linked to COVID. You detailed a few issues, like the fact that there are some insurance terms that are changing, but things are becoming smoother. So thank you for your questions live as well. Eric is asking a question. Do you think that the UK should do the same as Switzerland and vote in favor of European directives to have the same rules as on the continent? Well, I'm not sure that's going to happen, but Sir Julian, do you think that's utopian? Well, that was my opinion, but you're here to give us yours. Well, I don't think that will be the case tomorrow.
Voilà.
There you go. Can I ask a question to both of you? Let's talk about another elephant in the room. To what extent is it important for the British to feel like they can't just keep trading in a very easy way? Because the British press now is saying that the EU is trying to sanction them, to punish them. But is it important for the EU to try and make sure that the single market remains differentiated from other countries? Because if the access is too simplified, it might undermine the single market. One example, Marks and Spencer's after Brexit was completely empty in France. And I think I'd like to mention the tikka masala test. I really love the tikka masala from Marks and Spencer, and at the start of the post-Brexit period, there weren't any curries in Marks and Spencer's in Paris, but now they're back. So clearly things have settled. So to what extent is it important for the EU to maintain some obstacles, to show other countries what consequences it's going to have if they leave the single market? And is it important to say, well, you can't have everything back within 3 months? Or to what extent do you think that's related to COVID more than anything else? So that's a question for the French, maybe. Well, it's a juvenile question. I think you're not part of my gang anymore, so I'm not going to give you access. I don't want to enter into those things. But regarding chicken, I think it's really a technical issue. I don't think it's a political issue. It's a technical issue of adaptation. Like I said before, one of the topics that mattered during the adaptation period was the fact of sending sanitary and phytosanitary products from Europe to the UK or the other way around. And those products have specific checks for which you need veterinaries as well. And there was lack of them to be able to export. So there was really an operational issue there with the lack of resources on the British market of available veterinaries to perform the tests to allow products to be exported. So is it a lack of will, a lack of preparation, lack of investment? I think it's a lack of information of what was going to happen when the rules change. Because you're going to play a new game and you've been given the rules 5 minutes beforehand. So the first party, the first game rather that you're going to play is going to be a struggle. Then you need to adapt, and then it goes better time after time. So Julian, well, for the concrete example of chicken tikka masala, yes, but I think that there are political underlying issues behind your question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some political challenges in some sectors, for instance, for financial services. I understand that the 27 would like more relocalization, so to relocate financial services and products, especially Euro products, Euro financial products from London to European cities like Paris or Frankfurt or elsewhere, but in Europe. That's understandable. But again, this is a sector where things need to be managed because you need to go beyond the simple divorce to find a new balance post-Brexit. Because if you relocate things limitless, in a limitless way, then you risk falling into a trap. Because there's also the question of access to a lot of capital that is in London. So there are political challenges, yes, but you need to have to manage them. Well, this discussion is very important for me because I come from Bourg-en-Bresse, where the best chickens of the world come from, of course. Chicken is very important for me. Yes, I was sponsored by the Poulet de Bresse when I worked from France Inter. On a more serious note, the British people are legitimately proud. And I think we should not move into sanction territory or have a fighting rationale, because nobody has anything to win from this. But we should also bear in mind that with Brexit, France and the EU are losing a strong ally on some topics. For instance, regarding the defense industry, I'm not talking about defense policy, it doesn't have any legitimacy there, but on regarding the defense industry, there are key challenges that can be easier to overcome with the UK than only with Germany. If we talk about energy as well, for instance. The choices in terms of energy mix of France are closer to those of the UK than those of Germany, including also other countries that are still part of the EU. So I think that trying to lecture the UK in as part of a confrontation rationale, saying, "Oh, we told you so," I don't think this would be a constructive way, a constructive approach at all. It's important to have convictions, to have sometimes stands, very tough stances if needed. Also, regarding financial services, it's very important, but we should not exaggerate. We should also not be complacent, and the UK needs to follow through with the consequences of what they voted for. I think we should remain careful. And if we should lecture anyone, I don't think we should lecture the UK, but our own public opinion or the public opinion of other European Union countries to emphasize how inconvenient a divorce can be. Whilst we all know that at the moment there's a lot of populism, there are social crises, and people are wondering whether the European model is the right model or our development model is the right development model. So here we have, unfortunately, a concrete example of what those type of decisions lead to. So I think this can be a pedagogical example for our own people in the EU. But we need to be careful. We should definitely not lecture the Brits. And we should also be careful when it comes to lecturing our own people, because we shouldn't be instrumentalizing our people.
Being in the UK, that all of a sudden new rules are imposed on you. It must be very difficult psychologically when you've been trading so freely before. How do you deal with the fact that all of a sudden new difficult rules apply? There must be a psychological thing, which I know the Brexit press says that Britain is being punished. I don't think that's the case, but to some extent you kind of say, well, why are they being so difficult? Is it difficult to actually react to the new system?
I think generally speaking, we were fairly well dressed in understanding the consequences going into the new year and the new world of Brexit. But you are always surprised by the little things, and it's the little things that suddenly become big. Such as our tools for our machines used to get repaired in Europe, and we'll send them across on a truck, on a boat or the tunnel, and get them repaired and get them back again. And now, of course, we have a formal border, which means that we have to declare the value of the tools coming back into the UK, and to start with, effectively being charged VAT on goods that we already owned, because the paperwork, we hadn't prepared ourselves adequately on how we actually send something we already own across the border and bring it back again in a new form, i.e. repaired. So little surprises like that are what caught us out in practical terms in the first month or two. So we've ridden that wave, but we continue to have little surprises like that. So although you try and prepare, you simply don't know what you don't know. And there are several examples of not knowing what you don't know along that journey. Becoming much less now, but as I said earlier, Northern Ireland was another surprise that we had to handle in a slightly different way, simply because of exporting to Southern Ireland, to Ireland, through Northern Ireland became a bigger challenge than we anticipated. So little things like that are putting us on trial, as it were, to try and find a way of doing it that satisfied both us as a business, but also our customers' expectations.
Yann vient d'évoquer, vous l'avez fait aussi, Michel Barnier l'a fait, le problème d'Irlande du Nord, c'est un problème sans solution. Est-ce que ça affecte les Français?
Northern Ireland, there's no solution for this issue. Does it affect the French? The riots in Belfast have been covering the news for some days now. And it reminds me of what happened in the 70s with the Troubles, of course. Does it affect you? Do you think it's an unsolvable issue? Is it just not very important for you in France? Do you understand what's at stake there? What's happening in Ireland? And could it even lead to the agreement not being ratified in the European Parliament, for instance? Northern Ireland is a complex political issue, and I definitely don't have the right expertise to have an opinion on that. But what we can see is that the agreement that was found is a general, multifaceted agreement. It was the best compromise at the date of the signature between all parties around the table. and the agreement today is not being complied with, and that has negative economic impacts, and we are clearly seeing the consequences there. If the border isn't between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, if the border is in the Irish Sea and those checks are not performed in the Irish Sea, then that means there's a gap, there's a loophole in our system compared to what was planned for. So we have direct travels, direct transport from Europe to Ireland that can happen without any checks that were actually provided for as part of the general agreement. So it is complex, it's a political issue, that's a multifaceted game. There's a political challenge, a business challenge as well. And for us, it's a real issue. If the checks are not performed in the Irish Sea, then the entire Brexit process is not in line with what was planned for. And this will have a strong impact on some companies. And of course, it can't remain unanswered in the coming months. Patrick Martin, do you have any solution for this loophole? Because I've been trying to find a solution for this problem for 5 years now, and fundamentally, apparently, there isn't a solution to this problem. Well, I think the situation in Ireland is concerning, and if there's a virtue to it, I think it is that it reminds us all of the fact that the EU is a peace factor. So we should really pay very close attention to this situation, even though geographically it's more of a British situation. And then politically, I think it also raises the alarm regarding whether the UK is going to comply with its commitments, going to hold its commitments. You know, that the calendar provides for an implementation before the end of next year, and the situation is already quite complicated. It's difficult to handle, and the situation in Ireland is raising suspicion that I think is not welcome at the moment for Brexit and for international relationships or trade relationships as such. Good faith trust is very important. So Julian, on suspicion?
Well, we had to find an approach and a solution for Northern Ireland, as was explained to us by Michel Barnier. And we just heard that we needed a solution to that problem. There's also an important issue for the single market, for businesses and for consumers. That being said, we should say that the solution that we found, quote unquote solution, is not well received by at least part of the community in Northern Ireland, and it's an understatement. And unfortunately, if we want to avoid a difficult situation where daily problems, as experienced by part of the community, would jeopardize the overall agreement, well, then we should probably look again into the details of the implementation of the agreement. We're not talking about the political details, we're talking about the detailed implementation of the approach that we have found. And I think that we have to find a sort of go-between in order to navigate between those who say, touch nothing, it's set in stone and we shouldn't change a comma in this text, on the one hand, and the opponents who think that we should change things. And that includes the Prime Minister in Northern Ireland. He said we shouldn't just give up on the agreement that we found. We should give it up. Neither of these possibilities are possible. So we need to find a compromise. Okay, we have 7 more minutes for this panel discussion. 2 questions. Somebody from Rouen is asking us where we stand with the fiscal issue. And Marie-Claire is also looking at us, and thank you for your question. She says, when will we have duty-frees back, especially on the Channel Tunnel side? So on tax issues, what is your feeling? the single market and tax issues. Do you see more and more competition between the countries? If Brexit doesn't adopt a different tax system, then what purpose does Brexit serve? Well, Great Britain is like the Singapore of Europe when it comes to tax matters. Now, from the point of view of French entrepreneurs, we have a situation that was very dangerous and unrealistic. And this is completely unrealistic short term. Some analysis have been done on an increase of the tax rates in the UK. And all of this will have to be assumed. This runs counter to the message or to the fears that we all had. Now, talking about tax issues, things are changing very fast. We have the positions that have been adopted recently by the Biden administration on issues that the MEDEF and France in general had been asking for a long time. We were asking for tax equal playing field. This was true for the digital giants and for everyone. The situation might be a bit different when it comes to the Republic of Ireland. So Julian first, on the tax issue. There will be differences, I'm sure, in tax matters between the UK and the Union. It is only natural, isn't it? I don't know if it's really tax matters we're talking about or over and beyond tax matters. I agree that we often talk about the Singapore upon Thames matter, and that would be difficult to manage, of course, in the UK. They don't really talk about establishing a Singapore upon Thames. This idea hasn't enjoyed very much support. So we should talk about taxes and all of the services related to taxes. But there are other areas where we will see a divergence in regulations. For example, we quoted that. We quoted the digital era, the digital area. So here, little by little, but possibly faster, we will have to manage a divergence where in the UK, we're more flexible in some areas, in some technological areas than here amongst the 27 member states.
Take on tax competition, because that's one of the points of Brexiting, after all, that there should be a difference in different tax regimes.
I think the tax regimes in the short term are going to be less of an issue than they are in the medium term. I think in the short term, we're all going to be facing up to the fact that the pandemic has caused so much commercial damage that to try and be ahead of the curve and have very competitive corporation taxes is probably going to be delayed somewhat by most countries in the West. So I think it's going to be less of a heated battle in that area. I did hear of a very ambitious plan raised by the Federal Reserve in the US last week, the head of the Federal Reserve talking about an international fixed corporation tax level, which is hugely ambitious if that was possible, to create a level playing field globally. I don't think that will ever happen, but there may be constituent elements of that across trading blocs, for example, the EU or the North Americas or whatever. But I think corporation tax as a battleground, I don't think it's going to be aggressive in the short term. And medium term, it's going to be hard to tell. But I hope that doesn't become the main tool for countries to attract. And I don't think it will be the main tool for countries to attract business in future. I think there's going to be so many other facets coming into play.
Ok, donc vous rejoignez en fait. Et juste pour terminer, donc Yann Le Riche sur la fiscalité.
Okay. Yann Le Riche on tax matters. Could you help us answer Marie-Pierre's question? She was asking about the duty-free shops. We have 1 minute only for this panel discussion. Could you conclude? Regarding the duty-free shops, first of all, it's not a new subject within the European Union. Competition around taxes and tax-related matters, that's nothing new. This kind of competition has existed for quite some time now. All of the GAFAs are now installing their European subsidiaries in the Republic of Ireland. That's not purely by chance. And if we have a capital company, it's in Jersey or Guernsey, not elsewhere. If you have a financial holding company, because let's say you're an international global group with headquarters in Europe, you will have it in the Netherlands. I mean, all of this exists, and there's lack of competitiveness. Now, what about establishing Singapore upon Thames? I think that we have to have the order of magnitude clearly in our mind. Singapore, we would have to check that. I wouldn't want to give you the wrong figures, but I think that in Singapore, if you look at the trade is mainly with China. We have about 15% of exchanges. We have the United States too, but trade, external trade of the UK with the rest of the world is 50% with Europe. 50% of the trade, of the UK trade, is with Europe. It's a completely different order of magnitude. If one partner accounts for half of your trade, you can't play around with the rules of the game and change them too quickly without there being consequences. And we were talking about these consequences earlier on: dissatisfaction, frictions, etc. So we could see that this might seem attractive as an option, but it's not the same order of magnitude. And we need some kind of stability if we want to continue trading and creating wealth together. You're perfect. We're exactly on time. We have 6 seconds left for this panel discussion. Thank you very much. And I think all of our speakers deserve a round of applause.
Concrete examples you were giving us. We heard you loud and clear here in Le Touquet. Merci beaucoup. Vous pouvez donc rejoindre la salle et je vais demander aux intervenants.
Okay, you could go back to your seats, and I'll ask the speakers for the next panel to come here to the rostrum, and we will welcome them here on stage. Let me remind you that you're watching us live on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. If you want to send in your questions, do not hesitate, and I'll ask these questions to the different speakers on our roundtable discussion. So there are different ways of addressing your questions to the speakers. Okay, so I think that meanwhile, all of our speakers for the next panel discussion have joined us here on stage. And this will be the second major topic of the morning. For health reasons, of course, we need to disinfect and to sanitize all the equipment and microphones. You could wear your mask or not. Well, I feel safe because we're far apart. All right, then. And we need a round of applause for the speakers on our second panel. So what is the subject of our discussion? Brexit, an opportunity for France? Who do we have here? I'm delighted to welcome here François Langlais. You know him well, of course. He's a journalist on the TF1 TV channel. He specializes in economics. You have Alexander Allroyd, Member of Parliament, President of the France-Great Britain Friendship Group. We will be able to talk about Brexit with you, as we've done in the past. We also welcome Pierre Ducrot, who's the mayor of Montreuil. He's not with us. He should have been, but he might join us. Maybe he's in the room somewhere. He should join us, and he will be most welcome. We have François Lavallée, President of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce Littoral Hauts-de-France. And we also have Robert Herry, who's the Member of Parliament for Pas-de-Calais. All right, then. Brexit. Is it an opportunity for France? François Langlais, what do you think? I'm really eager to hear you on this subject, because from what I understand, we beg to differ. We beg to disagree on this. But I'm here only to ask the question. So let me ask you the question. Is Brexit an opportunity for France? What would you say? Well, listen, yes. I think that the answer is yes. I'm not going to talk about microeconomics and small businesses, but in general, let us say that really what struck me, and this is what I would say by way of introduction, is that the French don't really understand what Brexit is all about. And the French political elites don't understand what Brexit is all about. Possibly the business community does, but I think amongst voters, the feeling might be a bit different. But in fact, we have not wanted to understand the actual message that was addressed to the European Union. And Michel Barnier mentioned it this morning in unusually clear terms, especially on the side of from a Europhile like him. And this dimension took 5 years to emerge. It took a long time. As you know, the referendum on Brexit was in 2016. We insisted a lot on the fake news of the campaign with figures that were completely absurd on the advantages to the UK or the disadvantages for the UK of Brexit. There was bad faith. There was bad faith on both sides, as is the case in any campaign. And I remember a study of the British Treasury on the supposed economic cost of Brexit, which was just as excessive as the figures shown by those in favor of Brexit. Then there were harsh negotiations, and it was perfectly normal for these negotiations to be hard and harsh. It was normal for both camps to, despite their bounds of friendship, to negotiate in a very firm fashion to uphold their respective interests. All of that was normal. But the fundamental motivation of Brexit, I think, was completely left by the wayside. What was the purpose? Taking over control of the situation. That's something that all of the democracies are tempted to do. This is a natural movement. This is something that we see in most countries anywhere. Often, you have a part of the population that was deeply impacted by a number of phenomena, and they lose face in Europe. But it seems to me that you had Brexit, Donald Trump, and the Yellow Vest movement. It's all part of one and the same story. We feel this in the Western world. You look at the countries that have engaged in a vast movement of globalization. And of course, this has yielded a number of dividends, but it has also caused a number of unbalances and disequilibria. And from that point of view, what was the objective? The objective was to have a strong government on the industrial front, and that was what was the motivation behind Brexit, to have borders that would be controlled. That was also the purpose. And we wanted to have an executive government that was really at the forefront. All of that is very modern. It was a very modern project we had in Brexit. And I think that in a way, yes, it is an opportunity for France, because at least there's a source of inspiration in Brexit, a source of inspiration for Europe and for France in the Brexit plan. So we've heard a lot of caricature. We've overly criticized the British situation. And we said that Brexit was an expression of populism. I think it's exactly the opposite, in fact. Brexit is exit of Britain, and it can't be copied and pasted. I mean, we don't want to see other countries leave the European Union, but the UK has its own history. And Brexit is probably the best vaccine, I think, immunizing against populism. The traditional political elite should understand that protection is a true issue, and it should address this topic. And this elite should not leave the monopoly of this issue to populists, as we have done in France. Populists in France have, taken over the monopoly of fear, management of fear of the population. And in 2022, we will see what the elections will yield. And I find that the French Europhile political elite has some degree of responsibility, because it disregarded the issue of the problems of borders, and that's its responsibility. Just a few words now of conclusion. I do not doubt that the other countries will take inspiration from what happened in the UK. I find that there are some changes amongst the French executive regarding the issue of sovereignty. Sovereignty is now a word that has emerged and appeared in the vocabulary used by our president, of course, but also the prime minister in France is using this word very often, sovereignty. It was not used very often, and it wasn't an argument in its 2017 campaign. But 1 year after Brexit, sovereignty came to the fore. The politician who was to become the president did not agree at all on Brexit now. Differences are not that great, even though, again, in France and the United Kingdom, we have a different history. General de Gaulle was talking to Churchill and pronounced a very significant sentence talking about the differences between the UK and France. And he concluded, and I quote from memory, in fact, Mr. Churchill and myself concluded after a lengthy discussion that England was an island and France was at the, protruding end of a continent. So just to say that every country will have to find an institutional solution that will match its geography and its institutions, but the general guidance is the same. Just three words of conclusion. I cannot see that in the major ideological evolutions or developments in the last century, the UK has always been a pioneer. It's always been breaking new ground. It was between the two wars with the invention of Keynesianism at the time of the war, with the welfare state, leverage, etc. So from that point of view, I think that it was like an intellectual matrix, paving the way for new ground, creating a link between the welfare state and the economic system that prevailed in most post-war economies. Around the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher and Reagan played the same role. That was in 79 and 1980. Deng Xiaoping was also somebody who brought new blood. The sort of contemporary revolution was born in the UK and then disseminated further across the rest of the world in the years after that. It's very strange because in the same way that the French voted for Macron right after the Brexit decision had been made, the ideological guidance had changed. We voted in favor of socialism. We're always doing what others are not doing, but in the end, we end up joining the global current, the ideological current. In 2016, Brexit was adopted, the referendum was introduced, and this was probably a warning sign of what was to come on the ideological front. And I think it can help us rebuild the trust that citizens can place in their politicians. Thank you. Alexandre Royd, you were listening very carefully to each and every word delivered by François Langlais. Would you like to respond and react? Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for your invitation and to thank Daniel Fasquet for having invited me. It's great to be here in Le Touquet, and we just heard fascinating discussions. I think that there are elements that I beg to agree on and others where I beg to differ. I think easy comparison can be made between the different populist movements. We could establish links between Trump, the Yellow Vest movement, and populism. So there are commonalities, but there are also great differences. You were talking with the French political elites. In real fact, the British political elite has always been divided when it comes to the Brexit issue. There's always been part of the elite who is in favor and others who were against. Always been about they were against. Because in the discussion on Brexit, there's a question when it comes to the relationship between the UK and the rest of the world, not just the EU. And this is not something that we hear in our populist movement. If you take the Yellow Vest movement, the issue is to take over control of the situation, sovereignty, etc. But there was also the question on the French tax regime that was not mentioned as part of the Brexit discussion. So there are commonalities and other elements that are different. So you can't copy and paste. And in a number of elections, Europe, after Brexit, when we felt that there would be a lot of countries leaving Europe or wanting to leave Europe, there was a strong denial and refusal of populism. And Hollande was elected, and this was very surprising. So I don't really share what you said 100%. However, we should say that Brexit, for me, is bad news. That's for sure. It's a lose-lose game. because all of the collective instruments that we have in order to project European values and European model around the world are weakened on the military front, on the economic front, whether we talk about research, education, we are weaker now than we were before. That being said, there are some opportunities to be seen in Brexit for France in particular and for Europe. We're talking about financial services. I think we have some opportunities there. Doesn't mean that all of the financial services will be transferred to the EU or be moved to EU countries. That's I think, completely absurd, but some activities might be transferred. We might benefit from this. Since the end of the 1990s, the UK attracted a lot of non-European investors. It was a port of entry for these investors. Clearly, it's not just factories that were built in the year 2000 that are going to move all at once to the continent, but future investments will have this complex issue as to where they want to settle in Europe. And obviously, we can gain from this Brexit situation. It can be an opportunity for us to attract them. What is interesting in this discussion is that we often say it's an issue of competition with the Brits, and it's not exactly what is at stake. Competitiveness, increased competitiveness in France will be because the Brits have made a choice that will reduce their competitiveness for the long term. And this is a decision that was made by the Brits. So on a comparative basis, our competitiveness has increased somewhat, but the reality is that they have weakened their competitive position. And this has to be read between the lines. Brexit is an opportunity for us to look at ourselves into the mirror and to question our ways on our own model. We can't be satisfied to say, okay, our competitiveness is increasing just because their competitiveness is decreasing. It's not very satisfactory in the world in which we're living to get better just because the others are getting worse. We have to get better in absolute terms. So political answers have to be found. We have to draw the lessons from Brexit. That's the first opportunity. On the issue of competitiveness, we have to become more competitive. And Michel Barnier said some very inspiring words about this. In the previous panel discussion, we talked about establishing Singapore upon Thames. I've never believed in this idea. People think that the UK might become Singapore upon Thames. They're not really aware of the social and industrial model that exists in the UK, possibly not as developed as in France, but much more than in Singapore, for example. Look at the NHS. The English system is really part of the British identity, especially with this vaccine issue. Yes, and in addition to the crisis, the first signs of political change introduced by Theresa May go against the idea that we will have a Singapore upon Thames one of these days. But Brexit is going to give, I think, an advantage, positive asset. It would be a positive asset for the UK. The UK would be more agile, more nimble, quicker on its feet, will adapt and adjust faster. Our system is more cumbersome, heavier. It is based on a consensus between societies who have very different models in place. And this should be really the problem. We are Goliath. Europe is Goliath faced with David. And it doesn't mean over the long term that we will function better as a model and be more competitive as a model. And we have to question our ways. We are very slow again, we're very cumbersome, our structures are very heavy. This is true for Europe and this is true for France. And here, I'm sure that the Brits will derive an advantage from Brexit. They won't have to, engage in such cumbersome procedures. Look at the European stimulus package. It gives us a lot of clout. It gives us a lot of strength, but it takes a long time to implement it. We're not very responsive or reactive. The Brits won't have this kind of problem. They will be able to respond very swiftly. They will have an advantage, which is responsiveness, reactivity. The fact that they should be nimble and quick on their feet is definitely an advantage. Our French and European model is a lot slower and will have to become more responsive or reactive in the future. So there are opportunities out there, granted, but the opportunities are as follows. Brexit is a mirror into which we have to look at ourselves and question our ways. And rather than saying, okay, we stand to get more competitive or get stronger just because of the weaknesses of lack of competitiveness of the Brits, the long-term vision is that we have to draw the right conclusions for Brexit and we have to improve our model, social, economic, research, innovation model, etc. And I think that the crisis is probably an accelerator, a trend accelerator. Alexander Rolroyd, you're one of the rare people who really have both feet in both countries. I mean, one in France and one in the UK. I often hear you on the BBC. Your English is just as good as your French. You're completely bilingual. So you really understand both cultures very well. François Lavallée, you're the president of the Littoral Hauts-de-France Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You're here with us. Now I see what you look like. Concretely, do you think that there are opportunities to be drawn from this Brexit agreement for France? Is it an opportunity? Is it too early? Is it too premature? It's only been 3 months, after all, since the Brexit was introduced. And what are the successes so far? Well, for the time being, not much success. We've seen a lot of negative impacts. Very negative impact last year, and not very good. If you look at the traffic across the channel, there's been a sharp decrease. So we really can't talk about positive trends today. What have we seen? Well, thanks to the agreement, and I think we need to thank Michel Barnier for having worked on this agreement, we've gained a few years so that we had more time to assess how we could cooperate with Great Britain. So there are two ways of looking at things. We will cooperate. We will engage in close cooperation with the Brits, and I hope that in a number of years we will resume the same levels of trust and cooperation as we enjoyed a few years ago. Let's not forget that we are the second border of Great Britain, talking about the Hauts-de-France region, second border with Ireland. So we reap the benefits from this European community, the ability to communicate, to trade very quickly, to engage in swift movements of goods and services. So for 20 or 30 years, we really enjoyed this possibility to work very closely with Great Britain. And so it's one step behind. We're going back. So this ability to cooperate is very, very significant. Earlier on, I heard an expression. Somebody was talking about regulatory divergence. Typically British, isn't it? Everything is going to happen there. Regulatory divergence. If Great Britain engages in environmental dumping, for example, if the government fails to apply all of the European rules, well, then this will mean that we are in for very tense relations with Great Britain, a lot of frustrations, and this won't be good for our region, for our economy, and for our trade with the UK. But it's a possibility if it tenses up. We were talking about the chicken story earlier on. I don't think that Europe wants the UK to recycled American chickens rather than welcome our own chickens. So we will have to be very careful about this. You were talking about an opportunity for France. Yes, it is an opportunity for France. This Brexit is an opportunity for France and for Europe in general. Again, Jan was talking about being ambitious. We need to regain some kind of ambition for Europe, more nimble, faster, more agile Europe. We need an economic ambition for Europe in general that will allow us, because we are waging an economic war, let's not delude ourselves. It is an economic war that we're waging right now. So Europe stands to gain from Brexit. Europe doesn't speak with one voice enough. And I think that Brexit will allow us to move on to a different kind of Europe, Europe that will be stronger faced with international competition. So it may be an opportunity for us, this Brexit, to resume with economically ambitious Europe. We will be more agile. We talk about agility, but I'm not sure whether, we should give lessons to the rest of Europe when it comes to red tape and paperwork. It's very difficult to set up a business in France. It takes a lot longer than in a different country. So you're right to say that in England, they're very responsive and agile, and we will need to become more agile.
Une question par rapport à ce qu'on se disait tout à l'heure, c'est la question qui s'impose.
I fully understand what you just said, but to come back to one of the major questions, you're here talking about what you've already seen since Brexit came in, but it's very difficult to distinguish between what is due to COVID and what is due to Brexit, and it makes things even harder. It's true, but if you look at cross-channel trade between 2016 and 2017, it went down 10%, whereas it had been going up 2% per year up until then. All of this stop and go, what are we doing, we don't know, has created issues, and business hates uncertainty. We know that companies will adapt to change. We know that companies will set up shop where they can make the most money. And the European market is huge. Over the last years, we've certainly seen a lot of uncertainty and a lot of investment being held back, especially in the UK, from the big investment funds. A very simple example of this would be, if you look at cars today, the big trade flows with the UK are car parts, food and cosmetics, especially for the north of France. Cosmetics, really? Yes, there are lots of cosmetic factories in the north of France. It's one of the big trade flows towards the UK. And these flows have already been affected. We've lost about 10%, 2017, 2019, and then COVID added an extra 10%. It is very difficult to distinguish the impact of COVID versus the impact of Brexit. It's true. I think that since the beginning of the year, no one will be able to tell you exactly what is due to COVID and what is due to Brexit. That's simply impossible. The fact that there are virtually no passengers traveling between the UK and EU has also helped decongest commercial traffic. Most of the holdups were due to COVID versus Brexit before COVID anyway. An investor will generally want to invest in a place where he can look after his investment. So the UK was definitely legitimate in deciding to leave. I think it was a bad decision for them and for us, but the question is, how do we adapt? But Terry, MP for the Nord-Pas-de-Calais, Northern France, what is your opinion on this? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Michel Barnier and Damien Fasquier. It was truly Daniel Fasquelle who did a lot of the work before I became MP. As Michel Barnier said earlier, though, Brexit is like a divorce. And when you have a divorce, you need to share the furniture and the pets and everything else. And that's kind of what the European Committee went through. And if we're to fairly share the furniture and everything else and still be able to get on in the future, we need to respect each other. But there are two things I'd like to say before I get into that, because Brexit, as you know, is coming right after a tragic death in the UK as well, the death of Prince Philip. And I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge that, especially as we are seeing quite a lot of deaths in Europe and the UK at the moment, more than 100,000 deaths in France at the moment. And I think it's important to think of all of these families that are experiencing grief at the moment. And I have, in fact, personally supported a commemorative day just to take a moment to think of all of the people we've lost recently. As an MP locally here in the north of France, in the Hauts-de-France region, and for the Pas-de-Calais, I have to say that the dialogue that we've had and that we're going to continue to have, and the importance that we give to all of this. And I know I've got a friend in the room. We can't really see the audience very well, but Marc Ollet, a friend of mine, is in the audience here. And this is someone who has worked very hard to defend fishing rights. We've got fishermen in the room with us right now, in fact. This is something that we'll be coming back to this afternoon, in fact. Well, I would like to just say a few words about it because it's so important to me. We do need to find a solution for the fishermen here. Michel Barnier said it earlier. The fishing licenses are being handed out by the UK, and there is a huge gap at the moment in how many people need them and how many people are getting them. And the French fishermen don't know who to turn to, and we need to find solutions for them and for others. And of course, maybe we can look at supporting fishing of some species in the English Channel that we haven't necessarily been fishing up until now. The fish weren't asked for their opinion on Brexit. They weren't given a choice between English or French fishing waters. But on top of that, there's the cultural side. You know, we live quite near England. We have linguistic exchanges. We have a lot of school trips going over to the UK, for example. Well, speaking of that, Michel Barnier discussed the Erasmus project. This is one of the, personally, I think this is one of the greatest losses. I know so many people who used the Erasmus project when they were at school. So what has Brexit meant for schools, middle schools, high schools, Erasmus students in the region? At the moment, everything's stopped, of course. But even beyond COVID, what do you think about the future? We still need to understand what the UK is going to do. They want to remain independent on this. From the French and European perspective, we're going to keep Erasmus, and at the moment, nothing is happening at all because of COVID. At the moment, we simply don't know enough, and we're waiting for the situation to evolve. And it certainly is a big source of concern for our students, because there's a shared need on the English side and on the French side. And it's why we're saying that we need to maintain respect between each other. French people can always open up opportunities, but if we don't respect each other on either side of the table, then we're simply not going to be able to find agreements and compromises. Specifically in this case on students, I think that the student programs must continue. We don't know what's going to win out. The UK is going to require a passport to travel between France and England. All a French person would have needed in the past to get to England would have been their ID documents, which is very easy for students and makes school trips easier to organize. So these things really are important for both sides. Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I'm not massively objective in this. You just need to look at my Twitter feed to see that I'm not the greatest fan of Brexit. In fact, I wrote a book called Brexit, Autopsy of an Illusion. But a question for you, because for years and years, I've been hearing that this is a new opportunity for Europe. It's a brand new beginning, especially with the vaccine situation. But people have been saying this for years, and for years, Europe doesn't seem to be able to seize this opportunity. People like you, Francois, seem to be fearful about sovereignty of European nations, and maybe they're not that wrong if people have been saying that this is a new opportunity for Europe and it's just been left on the table for years. So I'm playing devil's advocate against my own convictions here. Absolutely, but before we get back to that, I would like to just come quickly back to fishing. Fishing is an important and extremely complex component of the agreement that we have with the UK at this point. More so than on other topics, this is something that, as we've done over the last years, France is going to need to apply pressure on the 26 other members and on the UK to improve the conditions for our fishermen. Some issues will solve themselves, but fishing will require actual political involvement from the current president and from subsequent presidents and ministers at all levels. Remember that fishing is not something that is solved by the agreement. It's going to need to be renegotiated, and it is going to need to become a key priority for our agriculture ministry as they handle fishing as well in France. Regarding your question, I'm very careful about the business as usual issue. Europe is quite distant, and it's easy to think that nothing's changing. But everyone talks a lot about the single market, and the single market only came around in the 90s and noughties. And that has been a huge shift. We've got the economic recovery plans, and we are seeing criticism about how slowly countries are being to ratify the recovery plan. But this is a huge European initiative with shared debt behind it. Europe's changing, Europe's evolving. It's maybe not going as fast or in the direction that some people will want, but it's definitely changing. I think that it's spurious to claim that Europe isn't changing. Europe has been changing gradually, but significantly since the 90s, with a shift in competence of the European Parliament over the same period. And during the public health crisis, Europe took a central role that you could be happy or discontent with, but there were definitely changes in the European Union. That being said, it's also important to distinguish between what is being handled at European level and what is being handled at national level. There are some real questions that we need to ask ourselves at French level. The simplification of the administration that's going on in France at the moment. We've got Denmark, you've got Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands that have a lot of French people living there at the moment, and they don't have the same kind of issues with immigration and with administration that France does at the moment, and we need to catch up. COVID has simply put a number of things on pause at the moment, on ice, but the changes definitely need to happen. Regarding the way we build up our future with the UK, there are areas, there are fields in which I think that we can do some productive work and that we can be ambitious with our goals on in a bilateral way. We heard about Saint-Malo and the agreement there. I think that a defense union is something that we could get to very quickly. A couple of days ago, there was an announcement about exports of fossil fuels. There are some European countries that are involved in this, not the European Union, but some European countries, including the UK. So the UK is going to be still part of some foreign policy and economic initiatives as part of the European community, so to speak. But if we are to build strong, productive, peaceful relations in a sustainable way, we're going to need to get over Brexit. So long as Brexit is a key policy tool in the UK for the government, wanting to show that every good thing comes from Brexit and every bad thing is due to the EU and vice versa, we're not going to be able to move forward, and we're not going to be able to build anything that's productive. I listened to the speech by the Chancellor of the Exchequer presenting the budget, and I realized that in that budget, there were very few mentions of Brexit. But there is a final thing that I think is absolutely key, and we just heard it. It's cultural ties. Because cultural ties are the first victims because people feel that culture isn't that important. But actually, I believe that this is what guarantees peaceful relations in the future. I represent hundreds of thousands of French people living in the UK, and I know that there are lots of English people living in France. We need to make sure to help artists, students, musicians, and help them travel freely and spread culture. And British culture is very important economically in France as well. But I think that fundamentally there is a need to maintain our cultural ties so that we can continue to understand each other. François Langlais, becoming myself again and stopping being devil's advocate, you discuss sovereignty a lot, but there are reasons for which people like me are very European, because I remember growing up in the UK that we were knocking on Europe's door and wanting to get in. We had wars throughout my childhood with Iceland and with the common market. I remember that in '73, the generation that had fought for British sovereignty and for Europe is precisely the generation that brought us into the European project. So when you say that this is an opportunity for France to get its sovereignty back, I can only wonder if it's actually not a step backwards, and if in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to go back to the same kind of problems that I saw when I was a boy in the UK and my parents' generation, whose only dream was to give up a bit of sovereignty to be a little bit more peaceful. Because all of the papers and all of the politicians were the complete opposite back then. It was the Tories who wanted to get into the single market, and it was Labour that was against the EU. And all of the newspapers were for the EU. The Sun was running headlines such as "It's cold outside," with Mrs. Thatcher wearing a European flag. Do you think in the next 20 years we're going to go back to where we were 40 years ago? Do you think that sovereignty is an issue at this point? The question you're asking is very important, and I think it's at the heart of what we're seeing in today. I may have given you the feeling that I was anti-European, but I'm not really. I'm a huge admirer of the UK and of the EU, and they kind of go together. I'm definitely not against the principle of the European Union. I'm mainly against the form in which it's presented itself over a more recent period. And I know that it's much easier to stand outside and poke holes than it is to be the one actually doing things. But unfortunately, and this is something that has been true forever, there's a swing of the pendulum. When you look at ideology and the way it goes back and forth for centuries at this point, that pendulum swing takes about a generation, our generation in this case. And I agree with what you said. You said that when we were young, we actually wanted to give up our sovereignty. I agree with you. We're basically the same age. We were part of that liberal generation that wanted to break down borders, that wanted to share, globalize, in every noble aspect that has. Of course, wanting to come together and work together brought a lot of very important progress to society, culture, economy. And this is why I'm saddened by the UK leaving as a European, because even if our differences are there and may become exacerbated, actually, by being different, we become stronger. The UK brought a lot to the EU. The single market was a British initiative. It was where the European project met the economic needs of a globalized society, and the British were instrumental in creating the single market. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that if you look at how things have changed over our history, I think there's always a back and forth between liberalism and protectionism, and liberalism eventually becomes a caricature of itself at the end of that cycle, with inequalities becoming more pronounced, and with things such as Brexit. And some of those effects end up causing the pendulum to swing back. It's often a separate generation. Each generation tries to break away from what the previous generation did. Everyone wants to do the opposite of what their parents did, and that means that we end up committing the same mistakes that our grandparents made. And I agree with you that this push for protectionism, and I don't just mean that in an economic sense, is an interesting one. Basically, our generation, the baby boomer generation, put freedom above everything in all fields, including in business. And the generation that's coming after us wants to protect themselves. And there's this pendulum swing. Like I said, it takes 40, 50 years, and then the full back and forth takes 80 years. This is just an observation. And generally, when the pendulum changes direction, there's some kind of deep financial crisis that raises serious questions about what people are doing. And generally, that's when the populists come in, because the populists are the first people to realize that the world has changed, because the seated elite doesn't want to change things. They're benefiting from the status quo, and therefore the powerful elite is unlikely to want to change things. Suffice to say that it's quite likely that in the next 20 or 30 years, once again, the desire for freedom will drive us. Maybe we'll be on a different stage in 20, 30 years. Mr. Thierry, Mr. Laballe, do you think that France can take up this challenge if there is something positive to Brexit? You brought up a lot of the issues related to Brexit, but do you believe that France, because this is the title of this round table, do you believe that France has the energy, the know-how, the skills to benefit from Brexit? Because at one point or another, people are going to have to deal with the situation as it is, even if it means damaging the UK as part of a competition. My colleague here just said that one day or another we're going to have to move on for Brexit, and I think that's very relevant. We're going to have to understand what post-Brexit means. For example, farmers. The CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, I believe the UK farmers were not in favor of that at all when it came in. So maybe there's a new opportunity there. Maybe we can use the French presidency of the European Commission to do things, and each day counts in that process. Our English friends also never wanted the euro currency. So what will happen to the euro? I might be wrong, but maybe the euro will go up in value because of the current conjecture. Maybe that's an opportunity, I don't know. I actually discussed this with some other MPs last week. What about language? English is an international language, but the UK is no longer part of Europe. So some people want French to take over a little bit and maybe become one of, and I do mean maybe become one of the lingua francas that's used within the European Union. So those are just a few ideas, and I'm sure that there are other ideas out there, and I'm fully convinced of the potential of some of these opportunities. And I'm sure that there will be interesting things happening in finance as well. There are financial players that have already moved back to France and more to come. So I think that we need to remain respectful. But now that the divorce ruling has been pronounced, we need to move forward with that situation. I don't know whether I answered your question, but that's very interesting, because I was with Clément earlier because I was part of a panel that was being asked to promote French as a language post-Brexit. There were 20 people, with a lot of people who don't have French as a first language. So people who learned French. But it's definitely an issue for a lot of non-French speakers in European institutions, because they would have to learn French. They already generally speak English quite well, but now we need to find a way to incite them to actually learn French. Mr. Laballe, for the future, what are the positive things for France? Well, we've got that economic recovery plan, but Europe is protecting its economy. Europe is protecting itself, and I think that soon we'll see a carbon tax on imported products into Europe, and that would help regulate the chaos between ecological standards between countries such as China, the US, and elsewhere. So Europe has 450 million inhabitants. If you compare us to regions that have a billion, we have 450 million. We're the largest economy. And if France were to overnight become all alone, 70 million only, it wouldn't really work very well for it. So I think that France is lucky to be part of the European Union. Currently, the UK produces car parts, spare car parts that then get sent to France and vice versa. And I think that in the future, we're going to see some European countries producing for the European market. So it's up to us to open ourselves up to these opportunities and to welcome these new countries, show that France is a great place to work, to have business, and this involves making our administration simpler. And we'd also like to see special economic regions in France that would, for example, promote new technologies and their development. So I think this is a great opportunity for France if we are able to fully leverage it. Again, playing devil's advocate a bit, do you think that France is able to make itself simpler bureaucratically? Because a lot has already been done, it has to be said. A lot of things have been harmonized. I moved to France 40 years ago and it was very different, but there still is this very heavy French bureaucracy. And we saw it through the vaccination campaigns. There's this inertia to the French system. Do you think it's even possible to do things in a lighter way, in a more Anglo-Saxon way? When there's a will, there's a way. I think that when there are difficult decisions to be made, you need to look at maybe being unilateral. I know that democracy means that we need to find compromises, need to hold committees and reach consensus. But I think that for strategic issues, we need to just make a decision quickly, maybe have the state or another actor just make a decision. On vaccines, very briefly, this is a very concrete example for Europe and for the UK, and is very topical. What lessons can we learn from the vaccination campaign? You may well say that the UK was right to leave because it helped them vaccinate everyone. Do you all agree on that?
In any case, it's an experience from which we should draw conclusions. I share my neighbor's opinion. I think that if we want to do things, we can do things. But it's true that here, to put things bluntly, vaccination clearly was an advertisement campaign, an immense advertisement campaign in favor of Brexit. And just sorry for interrupting you, I was shocked this week to see that according to a survey, a lot of Remainers are saying now that they would vote in favor of Brexit just because of what happened in the vaccination campaign. 10% of the Remainers are saying that they were wrong in voting in favor of Remain. It's true, it's not very surprising, but we should perhaps be a bit more nuanced as well, because the decision of pulling together the vaccine supply was the good decision. It was the right decision. If we all asked for vaccines on the international market, every individual European country, the situation would have been far worse than it is today. So, of course, there's the supply issues because of the European Union process, but there's also, of course, the French red tape. And it's not only the EU, the French bureaucracy also plays a role in the difficulty of the doses supply. But structurally, it's, of course, much harder to make decisions when there's 27 of you than when you're on your own. That's the structural handicap of the EU. But the EU is learning, and I observe that things are changing. There are European people that know the industrial processes now more and more. Thierry Breton, for instance, is one of those people. He was a boss in the industry before. So I think the clouds are sort of lifting, which means that one might think that just like we've seen during the Euro crisis, just like we've seen for the recovery plan, which definitely will not be enough, but still, I think that little by little, Europe will draw conclusions from all of that. I was also very shocked hearing some French politicians saying that it's not a big deal being 3 months later, but when you have hundreds of people dying every day, and when you have your GDP that's decreasing day after day because of that situation, well, 3 months is a big deal. It does make a difference. But I think that the decision of not blocking exports, for instance, meant that the EU was naive, and I think that will not happen again. I think we already drew conclusions from that. Yes, we're in a world where major powers are fighting against one another. That's true for all topics, and it's also true for vaccines. I'd like to go back over 2 things that were mentioned because I think they're important. First of all, can we simplify things? Well, one simple example, perhaps some people disagree, but I think that the tax reform in France, meaning that you now pay tax before, well, at the same time as when you earn your wage and not at the end of the year. I think everyone now agrees that it makes things simpler. And I think that change will happen through modernization and not cancellation. It's much more easier to modernize things than to cancel them. Now, regarding the debt management, I would be very concerned if we didn't have the European Central Bank or the euro. If we had 65 million people with our own central bank and our own currency, we wouldn't have the same public finances. So Europe protecting, it might seem like a distant idea, but they protect our people, our economies very concretely today. Now on the pendulum definitely swings, but in the meantime, irreversible change has happened. And I think that the next generation challenge will be to reconcile the will for more protection, the will to take back control with the globalized economy and the globalized challenges, climate change and so on, the major political challenges that are international challenges, and by definition need a more cooperative world to find solutions. So I think that this equation, this balance, is definitely not an easy one, and to find the solution, we will need a stronger Europe. Now, regarding vaccines, I think that for very old reasons, the British managed to do better. They invested in biotech. The biotech sector is producing a lot. They're very productive around Cambridge, and they have been for a long time. The EU, by the way, invested a lot in AstraZeneca upstream, definitely, and also in research. A research center and the research sectors was very subsidized by the EU because the British industry were performing great for, of course, 1,000 years, but for a dozen years more concretely as well. And that's the result of forces. And today, the UK entered into this crisis with a biotech sector that was in a much better position than its European counterparts. And that's just a reality. And that's why they found the vaccine more quickly and more efficiently in the UK. And their British vaccine is one of the major vaccines used in the UK. In Israel, they made a decision that I'm not sure we would like to take in France in terms of medical data supply, even though they're anonymized, of course, but there's a debate. It's not just saying we could have paid more. There are other questions underlying that matter as well. And I am very, of course, proud of being French, and I think that the best way of being French is to be critical and to emphasize what can be improved. Same thing for Europe. Just because you're pro-European doesn't mean you should say Europe is perfect and nothing should be changed. No, something should be improved. It's the first time now that Europe has done such a thing, buying vaccines together. And I think that definitely, with time, we will definitely find things that could have been done better, more efficiently, and it could have yielded a different result. That's undeniable. And that's also linked to the idea of progress. You only make progress, whether it's individually, as part of a company or as part of an organization, with new skills. You only make progress with new skills, and that takes time, and it's an iterative process. Arnaud asks a question to you. He's asking you a question. Why are the custom checks for boarding the Eurostar always performed in the EU? Well, I don't really why. I can't answer that question. Perhaps it's because of the abundant red tape in France, but I can't give you an exact answer. We're going to mention that this afternoon as well, because we have two roundtables this afternoon. Brexit, a challenge for the Hauts-de-France region, especially for the fishing and tourism industries. And then beyond Brexit, the migration emergency with the Touquet agreements in question as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We will have a lady with us this afternoon, but let's give them a round of applause. If I may, I think you did a great job, because it's not always easy to speak in front of people. Now, of course, we don't have that many people with us because there's a lot of space between every seat, but thank you for your passion and your participation. Well, the roundtable finished right on time, and I think that if everything's fine, we are, for the conclusion, online with Xavier Bertrand, the president of the Hauts-de-France region. Mr. Bertrand, can you hear us? I can hear you well, Alex. We can't hear you, but we see your lips move. So that means you are talking. So could we please give him a round of applause? He can hear us. So that will mean that despite the health restrictions here, you still have a public, you still have an audience. You also have people listening online, of course. Can you hear me? Could we do a quick sound check, please, Mr. Bertrand? What did you have for breakfast? Well, there was a marriage between a continental breakfast and a British breakfast. Yes, we can hear you. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Daniel, Pascal, for launching this seminar at the right time. The right time to wonder about the future of the nation and of the relationship between the EU and the UK, but also the relationship between France and the UK and the future of my region. Divorce or fresh start, in my opinion, we definitely need a fresh start. There's no doubt there, but we are not there yet. And we'll have to meet some conditions for this next step to be a success. 3 months after the agreement came into force, the world is now facing an unprecedented pandemic. So where are we? Well, I think Brexit is an opportunity for France and for the Hauts-de-France region. I'd like to underline here the role played by Michel Barnier. The agreement between the UK and the EU avoided a disaster. I'm still convinced by the fact that a no deal would have been tantamount to disaster. And we all know that it's greatly thanks to Michel's work, his calmness, his determination. that we managed to find such an agreement. For 4.5 years, Michel and his teams preserved the unity and the interests of the European Union. I listened to him very attentively this morning, and his qualities, his experience will be needed for the European debate, and we'll also need them as part of our national debate. 3 months after Brexit, there's one clear observation at our borders. Smoothness was, generally speaking, preserved despite the custom checks. That's not, of course, by chance, but because of the hard work that was done regionally, locally, by all players, and in a partnership way. Partnership between the national players, the regional players, and the economic players as well. And I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and Industry for participating. So the government, the regions, local authorities, and the private sector, we all imagined this task force to think about the worst case scenario and to avoid it as much as possible. And I think that's why solutions were found. At some points, we needed some help from the national level, and I'd like to thank Mr. Gérald Darmanin's commitment as Minister of Budget to implement the necessary means for the customs to be preserved. I want a republic of regions with better cooperation between the regions, the government, and local authorities. And I think that this partnership that we implemented is the clear embodiment that it can work. There's no simple solution for Brexit. Unlike what populists are saying, extremists from all sides. I think here about those who welcomed the idea of Brexit before then being concerned about its local consequences on jobs. But we are still trading with the UK. Our ports remain very strong. We have a new ferry line. We have a new company for ferries as well. A new ferry line opened by the SDS between Calais and Sheerness. The British harbour is 90 kilometers away from London. And despite the decrease in Eurostar traffic, Eurotunnel still fulfilled its mission. So that means that our region is a clear link for Franco-British relationships, and that's very important. Now, trade, of course, plummeted since the start of the year because of COVID, and we need to do all we can to save our companies and save jobs. We also know that there will be early 2022 import checks by the UK. So we need to anticipate that, we need to be vigilant, and we need to constantly have information meetings, preparation meetings to improve the conditions for both sides of the channel. But for a fresh start, we need to solve all issues. And my pressing concern today is fishing. It's the priority. When I think about fishing, I think about a fisherman and all of their partners as well. There are still some licenses missing over 3 months after the commitments taken by the British government in Boulogne-sur-Mer. At the time of our seminar, 102 ships still don't have the needed license to fish in the 6 to 12 mile zone. I talked about that with the British ambassador recently. We need to lift once and for all this concern. Because as we speak, 102 boats, 102 ships cannot perform their work. It's unacceptable to tell them that things would be solved in a few days in January, and that 3 months later, things still have not been solved. So it's hard for us to prove the presence of ships of less than 12 meters long between 2012 and 2016. So why do we have this useless barrier in the agreement, whilst our fishermen, according to the agreement, have access to these zones? I like the idea of reciprocity. That's a synonym of fairness and efficiency. The interpreter apologizes, but the sound is very poor, unfortunately. So we need to subsidize our fishermen, because without any subsidies, they will not be saved. There's also the issue of post-2026. That will be very soon. According to the agreement, there will be a decrease in European quotas, minus 25% until 2026. But what about afterwards? We need a British commitment in that regard. And we will have to say that fishing cannot be dealt with separately, and it's not a secondary topic. Obviously, if our British friends don't want to give us any gift, we will need to be very demanding right now. The agreement provides for measures, and these measures can be taken if needed. The Brexit fund to help our fishermen needs to be used clearly right now, but there's a problem in this Brexit fund. The breakdown between the countries. The proposed breakdown is unacceptable. Netherlands, for instance, have a compensation that's nearly twice as high as France's compensation for fishing in the area. So we need to be very demanding. We need to once and for all stop using electrical fishing. The ban that should be implemented as of the first, should come into force as of the 1st of July is needed. We should apply it as of the 1st of July without any delay, and checks are definitely legitimate in this regard. Everywhere that is needed, we need to fight to protect our interests for fishing and for other topics as well. Our companies are facing the double challenge that we mentioned, COVID and Brexit. So trans-channel trade is, of course, made more complicated because of health restrictions, but we need to make progress regarding one particular issue, tourism. Hundreds of companies, of SMEs everywhere in our region depend on tourism, on British tourism. They are facing difficulties. 2020 was already a tough year with pretty much no British tourism, and this might be the case again in the summer 2021. So the European Union and the governments, British and French governments, need to agree on a way to let people move from one country to another for tourism and for economic activity. Now, regarding job protection, I'm convinced by the fact that we can have a win-win strategy for both sides. We invested massively with North France Invest. And we laid the basis for companies to work in our region. And when we fight for our economies, not only for our region, but for our entire country and for the European Union. Our agreement on road transport, for instance, was not only an agreement for our region, but for the entire country and for the entire continent. If we want to go further, we need to imagine new solutions. Since the summer of 2018, I've been asking the French president and the French government to implement a special zone around Calais. And I know that such a solution will allow us to attract investments in the duty-free zone. We definitely need new regulatory tools, new tax tools, and I definitely think we need to implement a special activity economy zone. We also worked to increase the offer for investors at the European level in our region, but the agreement avoided disaster, of course. Some people think it's a minimal agreement, but it was very much needed. It only covers trade, however, not all services. Michel Barnier mentioned it this morning. We still need to work regarding financial services, but in a lot of sectors, cooperation between the UK and Europe is essential. And I'd like to touch upon one topic that is very important for me. The migration issue was one of the reasons why people voted in favor of Brexit. And I committed to obtaining the dismantling of the Calais jungle. We did that with the help of Bernard Cazeneuve. Today, we need to renegotiate the Touquet agreements. The Touquet agreements implemented the Franco-British borders and its checks on the Côte d'Opale for 20 years now, meaning that Calais is a hotspot for international illegal migration. This shameful business of human traffickers is taking place there. So the people living there are suffering from human trafficking consequences. It needs to stop. The consequences are unbearable for the people living in that region, and the human drama, the human tragedies in the channel are also unacceptable. I don't want to have another Mediterranean disaster in the channel. The Brits decided to take back control over their borders. That's their decision and we respect it. But two solutions: either they take full control back between our borders and then the borders in England, or we redefine together the safety of our common borders, but with new rules and new commitments. We can't keep putting the burden on our transporters that are sanctioned by the British government, despite the fact that they complied with all checks. And they still have migrants on their trucks, even though, of course, some decision and they're not aware of it. So we need to redefine the Touquet agreements, and if needed, we need to arm wrestle. Now, the Calais-Dover axis is essential. It's key not only for trade for our region, but also for France, for the European Union as a whole. So we need to redefine the status of the harbor, as is the case for the tunnel. We also need to understand that the trade and security challenges are closely linked, and that this needs to be implemented as part of a general agreement of cooperation between France and the UK. For all of those reasons, I think it is urgent to organize a new Franco-British summit. This relationship, EU, UK, UK, France, suffers from divergencies regarding several topics. I mentioned border checks, migration issue, Eurostar as well. All of these difficulties are challenging the Franco-British relationships, and I want to soothe these relationships. for all of our citizens. We need to take into account the concerns and the interests of our citizens and of our companies on all of those topics, because our citizens and companies are those who are suffering from the consequences. The agreement between the UK and the EU for me is a starting point, definitely not a finish line. It covers part of the services. It's an agreement that can still change. There are measures that are provided for as well in case of conflict in some sectors. If needed, we should not hesitate to use them if needed. That's not what I want, but I also want to say to all parties that we should not hesitate to fight for our citizens' interests. Now, to end with, I'd like to say that even though it's hard to accept for some, we need to resist to this will to punish the UK for leaving the EU. They decided to take back control of their sovereignty, and that is something we have to respect. I never said that the British people made the wrong decision. That's their sovereign decision. It needs to be respected by all in the UK and in the EU. All of this, of course, changes the situation completely. Of course, we'll need to redefine the future of the EU, and I will talk about that in the coming weeks. But let's still keep in mind the fact that the UK is our friend. They are our neighbors, and the UK remains a European power, even though they are not part of the EU anymore. We have dense trade relationships, balanced relationships, and the French and British interests are very much aligned regarding the vast majority of the international topics. So we need to resist against this temptation of a division between France and the UK. We need to integrate the fact that we need a reinforced cooperation between our countries. Michel Barnier's agreement needs to be fully implemented without being naive or without being weak. We should definitely stand alongside Ireland. We should not let the UK not comply with the rules or use dumping measures or anti-competitive measures. We need to put on the table concrete recovery ideas. We need to confirm some recovery ideas. We need to confirm the reinforced cooperation regarding security and defense, because our two countries are and will be for a long time Europe's allies for defense. Nuclear powers, powers capable of sending armed forces if needed. We are powers with a long history, with a lot of soft power, and we're able to fight for maintaining peace, to fight against the Islamic State. And we can build great things together for climate change as well, for instance. We need to be partners within the G7 to have common initiatives without necessarily having an agreement with all the other European partners. Let's analyze the Brexit agreements without any, and let's apply them without any weaknesses. We need to have a win-win situation with the UK, but let's not forget that just like our British friends did it, and I say that to my region citizens as well, fighting for your interests is not an option, it's a duty. Thank you very much, Xavier Bertrand. I think let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much for participating remotely in this seminar. And you can, of course, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and on the dedicated website. Thank you very much, President, for your participation. The topics you mentioned will be covered this afternoon. Brexit, a challenge for the Hauts-de-France region, fishing and tourism industries, and then beyond Brexit, migration issue, and the Touquet agreements. These will be the topics of this afternoon's roundtables, and I'm sure we'll have passionate discussions this afternoon. For now, we'll have a lunch break. Thank you very much, and we'll be back very soon at 2 p.m. Paris time on all our websites. Enjoy your lunch. And the interpreter once again apologizes for the difficulties in the interpretation because of the poor sound of the speaker.